Roll call, please.
Gorski,
Yes, here.
Kelly,
Here.
Beggs, here, Scylla, here, Gaffney.
Here. Please join me in the pledge of allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, agenda item 2 is adjourn to closed session. Report on action, there's no report on action. Closed session. Item 6, approval of agenda.
I move approval of the agenda.
We don't, okay, then I would second that.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Open time for public to raise items not on the agenda or the future agenda. The board may not take any action or discuss items, but may briefly respond to statements or questions by members of the public. The board president may refer to staff for further follow-up.
I would take a note.
Okay, thank you.
This is new. I like new words.
I do too. Committee reports out. Finance Committee.
Okay, so we did meet, and it was a long meeting. On Tuesday, we looked at the interim financial statements. We didn't have any issues there. We had a couple of questions. Do we have some answers on those questions? Do you recall what they were? I think I can find them if you
The
did.
only note that I have on the Finance Committee report out is the Board of Director reimbursements that you wanted to have those itemized per Board Director member. So I'll make that change for next month. And then you did have some questions about the breaking out of the different CIP projects, but I think the answer to that is the beginning.
And wasn't there a question on the vision communication? Did you know what that one was?
Oh, you're right. And no, I don't have that answer
Okay.
for you yet, but I can get it to you.
All right, fine. We looked at the financial performance, and then we also looked at the approval of contract change for work on Acacia and scenic roads in Fairfax and Acacia. Thank you. It's in the tree. It's in the bush. Is that acacia bush or an acacia tree? At any rate, so the work seems high, but it's not out of line with change orders. I think it was 4% total, not this one. 4% total on the entire contract. So while changes are never fun, they're always going to happen, and that did not seem odd to us. We reviewed the resolution changing the reimbursement of expenditures for project costs from proceeds from tax-exempt obligation bonds. That was we had to make an exception to our reserve policy, which we've now made semi-permanent so that we can keep our reserve policy and also write checks for things we want to write checks for. We did have a long session on the sewer rates study, which is up on the agenda for today, so I don't think I need to go over that because that took a bulk of our time, and it's going to be taking a bulk of our time today. We also decided it might make sense, we'll seek, it's on the board, seek the board's pleasure to have a professional agreement with Hildebrand Consulting for a cost allocation plan and user fee study. So that's also been about 5 or 6 years old now. And we need to put that in. Again, doing these kind of user fee studies on a 5-year basis makes sense, and it assists us with all of our credit rating reporting too.
Well, no, see, this is not the service charge. This is fees
Yeah, fees.
for inspection.
Right.
Yeah.
But all of those fees come in and they play a role in our financial health.
Right.
So it's
But
important.
I just wanted to clarify, it's not the service charge.
That's right. Yes, because the financial subcommittee.
I can't hear you guys.
I'm sorry, we sure
Maybe
will.
talk.
We also looked at authorizing the general manager to approve legal counsel to execute a master service agreement with HDR Engineering for infrastructure asset management plan updates and program support services. So again, we want to know what our assets are, we want to manage them, we want to know what's got to come next. We've just finished an entire procedure of repairs. We're going to do a lot more repairs next year, and so the question is what's now down the road for the next 5 years. So that'll be on the agenda tonight as well, so I don't think I need to go much more than that. the last thing was that there was a award issue, again, it'll come up tonight, and that one I'm not going to touch on because it's a large one, and so the board will look at it. But we did look at the bids for this. I would say the number 12 on our agenda, which is agenda item 14, was an item that we split originally. And I think in splitting that into smaller parts, this is the second part, we saved money in the first part. In total, we're going to have saved on this project $2.5 million.
3.4.
3 point, was it really? Maybe the first one was 2.5 and this one was 1.4, okay.
Total 3.4.
3 point, and I'm really pleased that that happened that way. I will say that Kratos Incorporated came in on this one at the low bid, under engineer estimate, as we'll see when we're looking at this. And the higher ones were up to something like 30% above. So splitting this really worked out well. So that was the financial.
Time to give them real good news.
Yeah, that was, we were really pleased.
Spoiler alert.
Okay, so, thank you. That's complete. Central Marin, sanitation.
Central Marin, the first big item we talked about was the new cogen system pre-design completion. The generator that we have currently is a 750 kilowatt, 30-year-old, not nearly as efficient as new ones generator, and it is giving us problems from time to time. We've had to bring it down, and what do you do with the biogas? So we've been working on this for several years, and we're going to be putting in another generator into the same area that the first generator is in, and then the old generator will become the backup generator. At times we have to do maintenance on the new big one, and the question was, what size are we going to put in? Are we going to put in 800, 1.4, or 1.8? There's a range of generators that we can put in. But by contract with Marin Clean Energy, we're not allowed to generate more than 1 megawatt of energy, and so it's called the nameplate, which goes on the front of the generator, cannot exceed that. But one of the difficulties I had in thinking about this was, gee, why would we want to limit ourselves for just an incrementally little bit more to put in a bigger generator? Well, it turns out that the factory who we order it from, if it's a 1.45 megawatt engine, can ramp it down, put a governor on it, and make it so that it cannot exceed 9.95 kilowatts, and that's the new nameplate on the thing. But if regulations change in the next few years or whatever, we can work out a deal with Marin Clean Energy or PG&E or however it works. The guy comes in with the screwdriver and changes, we can change it at that point. So we don't have to make a decision, and we didn't, but at some point we will probably decide to get the big one and nameplate it down, but that has not been decided yet.
I would just add to that one of the issues that Michael and I were addressing is that we have a 10-year contract with Marin Clean Energy. At the end of 10 years, new contract. Change the governor, change the nameplate, and say, here's the new deal.
Why is Marin Clean Energy limiting us to one?
Because they want to know where their energy is. They have to project their energy in advance.
If you add more,
the plant.
No, we're pretty much at capacity. We don't buy any electricity from the outside.
Oh, I know, but we use most of that.
Yes, but
And
the
so-
name still, it doesn't matter. The name plate on the generator cannot exceed what we're allowed. It's just a regular.
I'll tell you why. Because we have a 10.4 cent per kilowatt hour deal with them for 10 years, and then after that, the pricing goes substantially more, less, onto 8.2 cents per kilowatt hour. But the regulations that we have to meet, the requirements of reporting that we have to give them are onerous, and we have to tell them in advance how much energy we're going to sell, and we've never done this before. We have no idea. So we have to tell them how much energy we're going to sell them next month, and we have no clue, but that's what the rule says.
Right now we can
My
just...
question is, we're using up, say, 600 kilowatts.
Right. We can't...
And so we're only selling 400.
Right.
Or say we use 800 kilowatts. So all we're selling is 200.
That's right.
Can't we sell them up to 1 megawatt?
Yes.
But,
Okay, but in the meantime, we also use 800.
the regulations say the nameplate cannot exceed.
There's Marin Clean Energy and their rules with us and their contract.
In the contract.
And with their contract with everybody, and they don't change that for anybody. So it's their, Marin Clean Energy is great, but they're not always completely reasonable.
But they may be, anyway.
Yeah.
And we went over the host benefits funding plan. They've got, their financial person over there went over it with us, and they've got a good plan. And they've got a very good plan, and everybody agreed with that.
$50,000 a year for the next 10 years, and it's
It funds itself. The San
we
Quentin,
will pay more into OPEB.
Oh,
50 grand a year for 10 years, and then it funds itself, and we're done. We're gonna be out.
we had to go back over the San Quentin State Prison wastewater service agreement again. And recently, as you may have noticed in the news, they had a little difficulty with one of their prisoners who was used to go down and do this terrible job of cleaning the grates before the pump station at the west gate of San Quentin. Did a walkabout and walked about the end of the fence and escaped. And so the prison had been doing that work. It was a gift to the prisoners because they really liked it. That's no longer going to be the case. And so rather than having somebody at San Quentin take care of that, the state has offered to pay for 3 additional employees at CMSA. And part of their job will be once every hour, 40, whatever the time is, 7 days a week during the hours when prisoners are awake. We will go over there in a little car and those grates will get cleaned. At the times when those people are not cleaning grates, they'll do all sorts of other maintenance work around the CMSA area there. And, and conceivably, just if there were to be a building maybe down the street and there could be a contract to have some landscaping done by these
We're
people
now in our
also.
hypotheticals.
And we described what these laborers, what the classification would be temporary, because we don't know what it's going to look like in 4 years. So these would not be permanent employees. They would be temporary employees, but they get paid a good wage, they get benefits, and we're going to do recruitment from the Canal District. Everybody be able to we're going to push at the Canal District. Look at most.
The beauty about this is that the budget for San Quentin to pay CMSA exceeds the costs. So they don't really have to do much, but they do have to get certain approvals. So it's going to take a little bit of time for this to start, but San Quentin will be paying fully for these employees. So to me, it's a win-win. I'm not sure if it's a win-win-win, but it's a win for us at CMSA. Well, somebody's going to pay.
Us. Not us.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Anyway, that was CMSA.
Is that it?
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
I have a question.
Sure.
CMSA. I looked into the service agreement, the new one, or updated one, I mean, and I got confused on the budget detail. So we're up to $1 million. The total service fee is now $1 million a year for St. Quentin. It's not us. I know that CMSA pays it. And then I was trying to figure out where does it say who's responsible for paying. So I pulled out the old JPA and I couldn't find it there. But it is the state, right?
Yeah.
It's not CMSA.
That's right.
No,
It's the state.
Yeah.
I just want to be clear
Yeah,
because
there's nothing in the new updated proposal that's different really. It was just kind of minor changes. The again, the prison is charged for any cost, and that's why the budget is a lot higher than they're actually billed. So the budget is always higher, it always comes under budget by a lot, and the beauty of that is that the money's always there if you need it. So, yes, that's correct.
Okay.
And there's nothing at this time planned, to my knowledge.
No.
Yeah, there's nothing being.
So this district is not paying?
That's
No, no,
Okay.
no.
I just don't,
We have a question.
And so the prison has said no more prisoners out there doing this.
Yeah.
It's going to take you a while to recruit and train and certify, whatever else, the replacement. What's happening in the
I
interim?
think
They're doing it now in the interim, and we're signing.
Who is they?
maintenance workers at Sanitary.
Yeah, same
Oh,
contract.
Not
okay, not
prisoners.
prisoners.
But in the meantime, the plan is that we'll start the recruitment simultaneous with the state getting its approvals and ducks in a row. It's not a budgeting thing, because the money's there. It's I'm not even sure, transfer, people, I don't even know, I don't remember why it's going to take them so long, but we're planning on doing them simultaneously, so we can pull the trigger as quick as we can.
Okay, anything else? Okay, North Bay watershed,
they canceled the meeting.
okay.
That was quick.
Ad hoc education and outreach,
I've only seen one commercial.
I saw one.
Okay, but there are commercials now on Comcast. Has anybody else on the board seen them?
Oh, many times.
Really?
Yeah.
Just watched
Every morning between 6 and 8 on MSNBC and CNN.
Oh, then I'm not looking at the right.
And this was this morning, if any.
Don't flush your meds. So I like these because, first off, we had the budget for doing some outreach. But the thing is, we're really getting the name out. The logo is there, obviously. On the Don't Flush Your Meds, at the end of the commercial, if people haven't seen it, it comes out with places, a map and places, Central Marin Police Department, CVS San Anselmo, Jack's Drugs, CVS Greenbrae, I think. And then the Ross Valley Police Department, I believe, and I think there was a fifth. So it's really great. I think everybody likes that. And again, one of our plans is if this becomes more popular and the other agencies see it, we have something like a 6-month pilot program. We'd offer to continue it by putting their logos on it as well. 3-month program. And maybe some of the other agencies will join in this, and we can all continue to do it at a low cost. So I think it's great. And so there's Don't Flush Your Meds. There's FOG, fats, oil, and grease. The other two that are coming are the lateral program information, and then the last one that is flushables.
Flushable wipes.
Flushable wipes, which are not flushables. And we were very, very keen to make sure that the flushables, because originally, you seen that?
I think, yeah. I've
Is
seen
that right? No?
No,
I didn't think so.
the flushables should be on hopefully by tomorrow
What's the
evening.
second one? I've seen two.
There's two.
Fats, oil, and grease.
Fats, oil, and grease.
The
So-
flushables, one of the things we had hiccup on is they were calling them diaper wipes. And I was saying to everybody, when I change my kid's diaper, right, there's the diaper, here's the wipe goes in the diaper, and the diaper goes in the garbage can. It's not diaper wipes, it's adult wipes that are the problem. So they kept saying diaper wipes. Well, stop doing that. If people think, oh no, it's the diaper wipes, adult wipes you can, those are flushable. And so we're trying to get the message out. It's, the things that say flushable aren't, well, they are flushable, but so is a brick, it's just a small brick. Okay.
I got a positive comment from somebody about RVS.
And
I thought it was a great, it was the one about flushing the medicine.
Okay.
Jason liked it.
Cool.
I want to give a high five to Nixis though, because
Thank you.
you pulled those commercials together and knew who to talk to, and so thank you.
Steve is doing a great job on this. It's really amazing. I'm really pleased. And there's more stuff coming.
Yes.
Yeah.
Lots more.
Thanks to Steve Mason, and also just point out that our collection system workers, when they're out doing service calls, will actually hang these on doors that are specific to the issue. So if we're cleaning out roofs, we'll put out information about root control. If we're cleaning a grease issue, we'll put fog outreach. So these are tailored to actual issues we encounter in the collection system. And we've actually developed original work on the sump pumps, because during this wet weather, we saw evidence of how basement type sump pumps exacerbate the risk of overflows during storms. And so we've actually hung those out on houses. in those areas during the storms this winter. And it's an innovation that other collection systems have seen. Our contractor, Gold Street, they've seen the products that we've developed with our own original input, and other collection systems are very interested in using the same materials.
Can I ask, and this just occurred to me, can we have somebody from the district, maybe Steve, reach out to CVS, maybe even Walgreens and Jack's Drugs, and ask if we can put some of these at their pharmaceutical?
We are going to do that, and we're also going to see if there's an increase in tonnage of medicines dropped off, and that's going to be our metrics to see what the success is.
That's a
And
great.
I'm working with Marin RX Safe to get that data.
And Marin RX is very pleased to get their logo.
Oh yeah, there's some happy people over there.
Well, it's interesting because that reminds me that at behind the CVS counter is this thing like here you can mail in your old meds to get rid of them, and then it says in somebody's pen writing, later, this is $4.99 or something like that. They're charging people to give them a mailer to dispose of meds. This may be before this program where we can actually just return them. But that struck me as very strange. Why would you charge somebody for such a thing?
Okay, well, thanks.
Next step, if the board's interested, we could do an agenda item on this, and we could show some of the commercials. But I didn't really want to do it necessarily as part of the committee reports out. But if you're interested, we could put this on the agenda.
Can I get a stack of these and I'll put them in the tent?
Absolutely.
Or whatever you have, give me, I'll take it down.
Cool.
Okay.
I'll drop them off.
Okay, let's go on to the ad hoc committee for facility search activities. We actually met and reviewed the go-arounds podcast, and they got discussed. We had some input on it. It keeps coming back to the board. Okay, verbal reports by board members and staff, and requests for future items.
Okay, any board member reports?
I don't have anything.
No.
I will just keep mine very brief as a general manager report. Good news that yesterday we received a signed approval from the US EPA, conditional to clean up the Larkspur Landing site. There are the
I
conditions.
never thought to spend so much money.
Yeah, so it's a milestone. A lot of efforts.
Who
gone into
signs it? That's what I was thinking.
Jeff Scott.
The head of the region, or?
Signed, or someone signed before. That's the signatory. That's the signatory. At US EPA Region 9 out of San Francisco. So fortunately, we've been preparing to put bid documents together. We're almost at 100% design, actually. And this is a good opportunity for me to remind you that we're not putting notice to invite bids on the agenda for the board. I'm going to just letting you know verbally we will be issuing a notice of invited bids. And our plan is to award contract to the low bid contractor, or the most qualified low bid contractor on the May 15th board meeting.
How far are you reaching out for bids?
We're reaching out as far as we can,
I mean, go to Kansas, baby.
Well, we've talked about, the nature of this work is fairly low tech, but there has to be some knowledge about decontamination procedures. There is, it's not highly contaminated, there's sensitive materials, and the bid documents will have EPA requirements integrated. And so it isn't like we can just hire anyone. So we need the qualifications, but it is excavation and then importing fill for restoring grade. So that's, the level of work, and so we are going to make it, our consultant's going to help us get the word out. There's already anecdotally local contractors that have expressed interest in submitting a bid, so there's something to be said for that too, but we'll spread it far and wide. The goal is, if we stay on track, to get a grading permit in the June timeframe from the city of Larkspur. We should be able to do construction this summer between July and October, maybe going into November. That's an ambitious schedule, but we're on pace thanks to getting the EPA approval. And just as another aspect, I did an add-on to the task order that you approved in December to do geotechnical investigation that was very targeted. It was about $24,000 add-on. in the area where there's a soil nail wall. You might recall on the property, there's a vertical wall, and our excavation comes pretty close to it. We scoured our files, going back to the 90s, for geotechnical investigation data to see if we could fill any gaps with existing investigations before I okayed this additional field work. The goal of this is it could save us thousands and thousands of dollars in terms of the bids we receive, because this data will give contractors additional information that will lower the risk in doing the excavation near this wall. So just to give you a little insight into the pace of things going on, and they drilled yesterday. So I gave the approval a week and a half ago, and the work is getting done. And we're doing this to stay on track to get the bid documents in shape to try to get a low acceptable bid. So anyway, it continues to go on a fairly fast track, and we're coordinating with City of Larkspur. They're aware of what we're up to, and it's good news so far. And that's all I have for my GM.
Once we commence cleanup out there, can our operations stay there during the cleanup? or-
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no question. And some of the requirements in the conditional approval will add cost, add logistical requirements during construction. It relates a lot to characterizing material as we excavate it. But we feel that's not something, or it's not unreasonable to do. It may add some cost, but it's integrated in the bid document.
So then should we have some plan to start putting agenda items on maybe in the fall or late fall regarding public process for what we're going to do with Larkspur Landing?
I'm open to board direction on that. I feel there's one step at a time. These are big steps.
But if you think you're going to be done in November, then...
I plan to be done.
But the public process is going to take time. It's
Yeah.
not going to happen quickly, so I think, I don't want to start it so soon that it's, but if you think you might be done around November, maybe we should start around December, and that public process, to mine, that's going to take months, in my opinion, and whatever we do is going to take months, so, you know.
Okay, after we complete it, we can start the public process. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. Sound good?
That's great news.
Any more
Yeah,
reports, Felicia? Do you have any?
No, thank you, Brad.
Public? Okay, consent calendar. Matters listed on this item are considered routine and may be enacted by one motion.
I'd like to pull some items.
Okay,
10C. 10E. And 10G, as in God.
okay, let's turn to 10C.
Okay. Have so on page 205, the top of the page, line item 2, other income, 136%. I know you have an A there, but what is mostly the income?
That would be, for this reporting period, actually the interest on our BNY Mellon account, $278,000.
276.
I'm sorry, 276, let me put the glasses on. Yes, there it is, 276. Bond proceeds that are kept in our trustee account at BNY Mellon. So that's a significant amount of interest.
So this is money that's sitting there that hasn't been spent, so we're accruing interest.
Exactly.
And how many millions is it?
The bond issuance in 2018 was 25 million.
It's over on the previous page, the total cash. 34 million.
Okay. Now, next, okay, page 105 out of the register. Okay, I kind of did a quick overview on office supplies. It seems like a lot. Is there something new, or am I just?
What line? Oh, okay.
Well, there's
105?
many lines. There's line 5. There's more as you go down. I'm not going to go through each one. but I'm just asking a general question. Is there more no, this is common?
Yes.
Okay. All right. And then I saw on here this, a camera lens seeker system was almost 8,000. Can you explain that a little bit?
It sounds like our operations and maintenance manager can.
It's a push camera head, and those units are generally $20,000 to $30,000. That's the head of the camera, not the reel. So they take a lot of abuse going through the system, going down rod holes. So,
CCTV?
yes, ma'am.
Okay. If you put that there, I wouldn't ask the question.
Okay, we can do that.
My brain doesn't have all that technical stuff. Okay, moving down the list. Where am I now? Okay, and then our software. How much is that approximately a month for our software companies, et cetera? 'Cause I know there's been discussion about that off and on, and I still see one item here is almost 7,000. It's like a renewal period.
We employ a lot of different softwares in the district, everything from our Microsoft Office suite of softwares to our CMMS softwares. So I would ask to get back to the board on that if you'd like a comprehensive report.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, is there something we can do different or better or not? I don't know, but it's a lot of money if you look, as you know.
Didn't we approve a new
We did.
Leasing,
and this is part of it?
well, the leasing structure for the servers is going into effect. But I think Director Meg's question is really about, every time the district invests in a new software technology, there are ongoing licensing costs, annual licensing costs that are also incurred. And so I think it's a good point that it's not simply necessarily a one-time cost that the district's incurring, that we have ongoing costs.
I'm just curious what other agencies might be doing. I'm not a
We're
computer
we're very innovative in technology. So
I think it's the cost of doing business enough, but the tech industry makes so much money.
Right.
Yeah, they have us, so to speak. Okay, and then, let's see, moving down, I hate to say this, but just to repair a vehicle is almost 7,000. What did we do? Did we wreck it?
Line number, please.
I'm sorry, page 2 of 5. Vehicle repair, 85.
Line 85, JW Mobile Vehicle Repair Steel Plate Cut and Welding Bracket System to Mount, $6,666. Ring a bell? No?
That should be the repair crew.
Yeah.
Manning. So the equipment, you got to figure costs anywhere from $100,000 to $500,000. And some of the equipment is getting older. JW is all the hydraulics. They probably cleaned the hydraulic tank, flushed everything. It's a big process to make sure we have the preventative maintenance program intact.
Okay, so it's maintenance.
Yes, preventative.
Okay.
It's not like a tune-up, it's a welding and
Well, we also have to meet
It's
regulatory
major.
requirements when we're having our vehicles serviced. They need to meet
Heavy
state,
stuff.
state codes.
Department of Transportation regulations.
Yes,
Yes,
tests.
exactly.
And it's not like somebody drove into a tree.
No, not
You
at
know
all.
about that, right?
No, yes. This is just regular maintenance.
Okay.
Okay, moving on. We bought $3,500 of office furniture.
Yes, the general manager and the assistant general manager both received new desks in the month of December.
2 desks for $3,500.
2 desks and a hutch, yes.
Okay. And I'm almost done. I want to know about the root foaming analysis.
That's interesting. We asked about that too.
It's almost 10 grand.
the number is?
114.
Yeah, that was with
We
Marin.
asked about that at the financial committee.
Yes, the finance committee did ask about that, and it was a pilot program that the district looked into. It's a type of chemical that is inserted into the pipe to clean the roots out of the pipe. So it actually effectively is dissolving the roots that are infiltrating the pipe system. And Stephen, you probably could give an even better description than that.
Yeah, so root foaming it's got its goods and bads. We wanted to do a pilot test. What it does is inhibit root growth, and basically I'd have to go on, potentially on an easement once every 4 years instead of once every, but the application can be, there can be good and bad. But we wanted to do an entire swath of Ross Valley and do a risk model on the consequence of failure and what it's.
Did you get results?
Yes.
And what did you find?
We're still looking into it. It's trying to find a good contractor, that's the problem. But the data's there, we're going to input it into info asset and just keep looking for a good contractor.
Is it a harmless chemical?
No.
It
eats the roots.
Yes.
You didn't do this in Fairfax, did you?
No, we haven't done any. But
Anything in the field.
yeah, it's one of those processes where you have to work closely with the CMSA, you have to notify them every day. It is a big hassle, but it is best practices to have a kind of a game plan and start planning it out for future use possibly.
What's the worst poison in it?
John actually worked for a company that made it, so if he comes back, he can tell you.
Okay.
Does it kill the tree?
It can kill certain types of plants. That's why we're very cautious, especially for low-lying sewer lines that are shallow.
I say put it out there. Every time you see a dead tree, tell those people they got to change their slabs.
Okay, did you want the vision oh, you're going to come back to
Yes,
that? Okay, I have a question on 161 Wells Fargo credit card. It just says expenses. I think it would be helpful to maybe put like a reference to where those expenses are and list them, because it's for 22,000.
Probably was some of the hotel expenditures.
Yes, we did have hotels and other wet weather-related expenses over the month of December, but the point is well taken, we can provide some additional.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm thinking CMSA. You paid my hotel room. You checked me in.
Oh, yes,
Casa.
that's also included in there.
yeah, whatever, just something. And then we bought a new vehicle, correct?
Yes, that was in the budget.
That was in the budget. Okay, that's it for that. Okay, then moving on to 10E. So,
Okay, 10E, yeah.
10E,
Approved change order.
yeah. Is the total change orders one, I'm a little bit confused. Where, for this whole project, do you have a total for all the change orders together?
It's right there, 388.
It's 388.
And that's about 4% of the project cost. And it's, we went over this one, it's a project that's in many locations, many small stretches of pipe. And it's basically when you do something out, you're not sure what's under there. I think that's.
And there was some coordination with other agencies that were unexpected.
Okay, and isn't the average around 10%?
This is actually lower than
Yeah, okay.
than average, yes.
Thank you for that. And then last,
One point though, since you brought up the agenda, or off consent, I would like to make a note that the larger change order is to relocate the sanitary sewer that's actually working perfectly fine. But we added on because the towns of San Anselmo and Ross requested that we move our sanitary sewer line to accommodate a storm drain improvement project that alleviates local flooding. And so we felt it worth part of our capital budget to the tune of $160,000 to do something cooperatively with the towns, recognizing that stormwater is something we kind of co-manage. We're trying to get stormwater out of our sewers, and when our local agencies need assistance, and storm and sewer are going to conflict a lot because they're similar depth and they both rely on gravity. So this is a good neighbor project. We're making resources available to accommodate the needs of the town and the local citizens in a cooperative way. So we use existing vehicle of this contract, a reputable contractor who has the skills to do this work. We added it onto the contract to be efficient with public funds and cooperative with local agencies.
Didn't we have the same kind of a problem on Lowell Grove recently?
where there was some
Yes.
sewer, some stormwater where we didn't expect it, that caused adverse.
That was another conflict, if you will, or just, two pipes wanted to go to the same location. And so the county job had recently put in a storm drain. It conflicted with our sewer. They did a quick fix there. Along for 10 years, it failed and we fixed it. That was more of an emergency response, which is what we don't want to do.
Okay, thank you. And
Okay,
then,
let's move on to 10G.
yes. Is that what this was handed to us?
Yes, and thank you for actually taking that off consent. Staff was going to ask to take it off consent.
Taking the whole thing off?
Just that one item, because there is an amendment to the resolution that was recommended by our bond counsel team, and the revised resolution specifies in section 2, thank you, that the reasonably expected maximum principal amount of the bonds, and it states for the project, is $15 million. And the draft that you had attached in your packet had a little different wording than 20 million. So
That's the
again,
only change.
this was recommended to be revised by bond counsel.
Okay, so we're pulling the item off?
No.
No. Oh, no, I'm sorry, just off consent.
Okay, so I want to be clear,
There's one little change.
She still has questions.
just to be clear, voting for this, this is bond money that's already there? No. Is voting for this saying that I'm giving approval for the bond money to purchase the Comcast building? Is that what this is about?
It is saying that there may be some capital expenditures that the district takes on between now and the time that the district actually receives the bond revenue that we would like to reimburse ourselves for using the bond revenue.
For example, if you bought a car or a house or a plot of land.
Right. And you subsequently did a bond issuance, if you subsequently do a bond issuance, that you could use that money for something that you've already purchased.
Okay, so it's giving approval then for bonds, for 20 million bonds?
It's anticipating that we'll do it later, but it's not approving it.
If a public agency spends money prior to a bond issue, they can't then later issue bonds and put it back into their reserve fund without doing a reimbursement resolution. And that's all it is. It's part of the bond amount that we have planned. It's not additional.
No,
It's just reimbursing.
And yes, if your anticipation is that we may come and have a bond issue request on the agenda in the future, yes, that's probably likely to happen. This isn't it. This only allows us legally, if we issue bonds, to take that bond money and put it back into our reserve fund, because we may be writing a check out of our reserve fund soon.
No, I get that. I just want to make sure, because I'm not ready to vote on 20 million bonds.
That's fine.
And we don't have all kinds of information.
Yeah.
And I'm a little concerned it was in the consent calendar, to be
Yeah.
honest.
The only reason we're doing it now instead of later with bond issuance, if that occurs, is because the law requires that we have done this by a point prior to expenditure of the funds. So that's why we're doing it now, we couldn't wait to do it later.
And it's permissive. We don't have to do anything.
Okay, and then the other question, since this resolution's been changed, so the noticing of this, Andrea, changing a resolution right now, it's not giving a 72-hour notice.
The agenda is what has to be posted 72 hours.
Uh-huh.
It's not uncommon for the board to receive new or different information at the time of the meeting, and the public has an opportunity to look at it, so there's not a Brown Act issue.
I just remind you, I was at a meeting similar to ours last night, and that organization doesn't provide jack before the meeting.
I wouldn't vote
All you
for it.
have to do is the agenda.
Well, the
Yeah.
other thing is we can change the resolution too, can't we?
Yes.
We can make other changes.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just talking about what's posted,
Yep.
whatever. Okay. I think that's enough. But
Okay,
we'll have
so
another vote, is what you're saying. We'll have another
Absolutely.
vote on the bond.
Absolutely.
Okay.
we haven't authorized any bonds yet.
Okay, I'm done.
Okay, so any further discussion on the consent calendar?
I move the consent calendar.
I
Motion.
second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. 11, study session sewer rates. Study session is for discussion purposes only, and no action will be taken by the board with direction to staff.
President Gaffney, I was going to ask the board if you'd be willing to change the agenda around a little bit, because we have another guest here representing HDR from Infrastructure Asset Management Plan item. And I think the study session is going to take some time, and I'm wondering what you think about switching the agenda around.
Moving item 13, is that it?
Yeah.
Okay, what's the question?
I answered that beginning of the meeting. if you want.
Sorry, I
would
moved the
certainly be
agenda
fine
too
with that.
fast. Sure.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, motion to, do you have a motion in a second?
I would move to move 13 to prior to
To
11.
next.
I moved by that and seconded.
Any discussion? All in favor? So let's move to item 13, consideration of authorizing the GM upon review and approval of legal counsel to execute a master service agreement and initial transfer numbers 1 through 5 with HDR Engineering in the total amount of $638,100 to infrastructure asset management fund update and program support service.
Thank you. Briefly, I'll introduce the item. We're at the 5+ year mark anniversary of the 2013 Infrastructure Asset Management Plan that this board adopted. Commitment for this year's work plan was to get started on the update for the Infrastructure Asset Management Plan. A couple months ago, Catherine Hayden, our Customer Services Manager, spearheaded an RFP process, request for proposals to get consultants on board. We had about a $600,000 budget for this exercise.
1.2 total.
1.2
First phase,
total.
6.
Yeah, for this year, yeah, 1.2 total going over 2 fiscal years. So there's a budget provided for the item, and we circulated the RFP to several firms. We received 2 proposals. 2 of the firms that we approached teamed on one proposal, and they were the selected team, HDR and West Yost. The other proposal from Brown Caldwell was very competitive. Both proposals were responsive to basically where we are as moving into a data-driven, more real-time living IAMP that's based on our data management system that does both asset management and work order systems for our crews and really integrates them. So both proposals were responsive to this idea that we're moving into the next phase. We have a lot more data to drive our decisions. And I wanted to introduce Alan Scott here from HDR, who traveled from the Sacramento area to be here personally. And first, Catherine, do you want to give any additional comments before we introduce Alan Scott?
So, we're really at a pivot point where we are in the 5th of 6 years of implementation of 2013. We're ready to shift now to more, instead of reacting to the deferred maintenance, doing the I&I reduction, really pulling in other elements. So we didn't look at the manholes or targeting critical infrastructure like your creek crossings. So shifting our focus a little bit, kind of resetting what our criteria are. They were just very heavily structurally driven in the past in terms of our risk assessment. So, this is, helping us transition to that, helping us to look in more detail at our pump stations, more detail at our force mains, our creek crossings, and our manholes, which weren't independently evaluated before. So.
Great, and we really, the district's been exceptional in implementing its infrastructure asset management plan. The numbers really speak volumes in terms of the expenditures, but also the length of pipe rehabilitated. The 3 pump stations this year that have been massively rehabilitated is something that we're going to highlight in the coming months about our accomplishments. So really, it's driven by the cease and desist order demanding certain outputs, but we really come through on that, and now have the opportunity to work with the consultant and package a very defensible package of improvements in the next 5-10 years that we can present to the regulatory agencies in a persuasive manner, in a transparent manner, with public input as the public's interested. So, thank you, Catherine. Great comments.
I would think one more thing, you have some materials presented to you. That's the task order with, the task orders were originally 5 executable pages. They've been packaged in, so we just do one approval for the 5 task order efforts. So that's the first part of that. And then you have the 2 cost proposals that came with the proposals from the consultants. So we had defined, the budget and the scope that we wanted. The costs came in, and again, $600 each other. But there was some, pre-definition of what our expectations were. And that they reviewed that and were able to, provide a scope that would meet what we had requested of them within that budget.
Right, so this is just the same tasks, but organized differently for more efficient processing from both the consultant team side and our side. So it's just something that was identified in the last few days as a better way to execute the contract. Before we get into questions, may I introduce Alan Scott?
I have questions of staff.
Oh, okay. You want to ask questions
Yes.
before?
I do.
Okay.
There's 2 quick things. I thought, and I wanted to see at the financial committee meeting, the 2 bids, and I thought you handed them to me, but I can't
These
see
are the
one.
2 bids?
The 2 proposals, yes.
These are the 2.
Okay, so that's where they are now. Okay.
They were the last 2 pages of what got handed tonight.
Thank you. And I know what, I was, I don't know if anybody ever watches these, but we film these for a reason, and that is that the public wants to know, they can go back and look at them. I know what we're talking about, but can you or Catherine just tell people in general what the heck an infrastructure asset management plan is? I know what it is, but
And why does it cost $630,000? I mean, it's basically an engineering study. That's a lot of money.
but what is it?
For an entire system.
So if somebody was sitting here in the audience, they would drag them off the street, they would not know what an infrastructure asset management plan was. And they wouldn't know what it was specific to a sanitary sewer collection system.
Well, good. I could certainly give that a crack. Actually, part of what I was hoping Mr. Scott to explain to you was actually part of the scope. I think, in a nutshell, when you get large expenditures, you're talking about labor, about people, time. And to do this reconnaissance and field work that's necessary to build a data-driven system is extensive. So whether you're in-house or hiring folks to go out there and do these assessments, there's a lot of field work, a lot of labor. And so this is why we budgeted this much money and why the bids or the proposals came in at that budget. So that's one explanation. What is the plan? It's a lot of underground, out-of-sight infrastructure that people don't necessarily appreciate, how extensive it is and how technical it is. In terms of just having pipe joints fit each other, making sure you have the flange bolt diameter correct and the right type of materials that can be connected to each other is a non-trivial exercise. Now explode that into 190 miles. Into 19 different lift stations that are 3 stories high. They just look like a little closet on the side of the road. It's a huge pit that you're driving next to on Sir Francis Drake Boulevard, that you don't realize is there. The stainless steel infrastructure, so it doesn't rust. The expenditures are significant and are kind of out of sight, out of mind. Really, to do the technical work to understand the hydraulics, what level can we predict in during these type of storm conditions? How large of the system should we design based on these modeled hydraulic systems? This takes a lot of computer calculation time. And if we're wrong, we can end up making big investments into infrastructure, disruption of the community, and then we don't meet project outcome goals if we don't calculate it right. And also, we need a systemic approach to be able to prioritize our expenditures. The ratepayers' funds are precious. We have to be really great stewards of that resource as well as the water resources we're trying to protect. So it takes a lot of homework and diligence and data collection and people putting things together in a comprehensive way that then informs our day-to-day work we do, in terms of setting up the budget, saying we're going to do this scope of work and that sort of thing. And we're going to put this, we're going to repair these lines instead of building new ones and those kind of decisions. So that's a little bit of a, in order to carry that out in a transparent and defensible way, we really need to do our homework and plan. And you did that in 2013. And we executed that based on not as much data as we have now. Now it's exciting because we're going to now, at the 5-year mark, use all the condition assessment data that we've been collecting and really inform the next wave of investment. And also manage expectations of the regulatory agency. We're going to use this data to say this is what we can do with this budget. And we need to do the engineering and planning to be able to make that case to the Regional Water Quality Control Board, US EPA, and other oversight agencies. So that's a little bit of an explanation of why we need to spend so much. But it will be well worth the investment because it's the kind of thing where you save the emergency costs. By doing the planning up front, the $600,000 is to avoid the $60 million emergencies that could happen.
And the $1 million funds. So let me repeat back what you said. Essentially, we have about 194 miles of pipes. We have a bunch of pump stations. We have our equipment, and infrastructure and asset management plan says, what is all of this that we have? What condition is it in? What needs to be fixed? What needs to be fixed first? What's okay? What's not okay? Right? Perfect. Thank you.
Again, this, in terms of it being an update, is also what have we accomplished? What have we accomplished since the 2013 IAP? So sort of a point in a road there.
So, Mr. Scott,
I think they explained it all.
see you later.
And we're not paying you for tonight.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really happy to be here to talk about this project and meet you. A couple more points that I wanted to add on to that. One is that if you were to go out and replace all of your infrastructure right now, I haven't done any calculations, but I would guess it's in the high hundreds of millions of dollars. All of the buried infrastructure out there and all of the mechanics that get the water down to the treatment plant. So really, it's a significant amount of infrastructure to study, to evaluate, and to understand. And the first phase really did a good job of getting all of the urgent and important things done. And now, turning the corner, there's additional important things done that may not be so urgent, but can come back and give you problems later. So you want to make sure that you understand the condition of your assets, understand the priorities that need to be fixed, and develop a program, which is the other piece that I want to bring up, that can be sustained and allow you to keep managing it into the future. So yeah, we're doing an engineering study. There's a good component of field work and data collection. But at the end of the day, we're leaving the district with procedures, data, technology, and know-how to keep this program going beyond the end of the project. So it's more than just a study, it's bringing the whole program, the management of the infrastructure to the next level. Yeah, my background, I've done something similar for Santa Barbara, and I actually feel like there's a lot of similarities between Santa Barbara and here. A lot of small diameter clay pipe is in their system as well, and that gives them fits. We started work there about 2010, and I'm still working with them today. And they've significantly turned their program around to from a I don't know what you think we should do kind of thing, to a real data-driven. All of the staff are on board, invested in collecting the data and being a part of the program. And they now, we did have, probably $2+ million worth of work over that time. But now they're doing most of that work themselves, and we're helping just with the fine points. If they're under consent decree, if they have get questions, go through certain analyses, we're helping them with some risk modeling. And we'll be doing some additional work on their replacement planning. So that's one thing. I've done that for roughly 10 years. And then I've also worked with the city of Stockton and the city of Sacramento as well to help them with their regulatory issues as well. So, and the other reason why this costs so much is that there are 8 different very different pieces of infrastructure to be studied under this. So it's not like you can do one type of approach and collect everything you need to know about all of these different pieces. You really need to go through and study each one. Although what we're doing and one of the key things we want to focus on is being able to leverage the previous or the earlier efforts to inform and guide the later efforts. For instance, the hydraulic model can certainly help support and improve the decision-making process for the I&I studies and other pieces of that project as well. So, and it is in 2 phases, mainly I think because we can scope out the first 4 or 5 tasks right now. Once we get into it and understand the data and the situation a little bit better, then we'll be able to more accurately scope out the remaining pieces as well. So that will be the second part, the second $600,000. We teamed with West Geost because the huge scope of services that are needed under this. Pretty much no single firm is going to have a corner market on all of those capabilities. So we've teamed with West Geost before. We know them well. And I've worked with several of the individuals on the team in other projects. And so we felt like it was a good, well-rounded team to bring to bear on the challenges here.
What do you think West Geost is going to specialize in versus what we HDR?
So they've got the hydraulic model, the lead on the hydraulic model. So but backing up, what we did is we put leads in regardless of which firm they are. And we're almost like a partnership more than a subcontractor. The West Geost is a subcontractor. So they're leading the hydraulic model. They'll lead the creek crossing and the lift station condition assessment. They'll lead the I&I study. HDR will lead the gravity replacement planning program, the force mains, the manholes, and then I've got a real strong background in asset management, so we'll be filling in the other pieces of asset management best practices and strategies.
And actually, tasks 3 and 4, we gave the engineers the budget, right?
Yes.
We, in essence, they didn't, and it's more like an allowance, right? We may not spend all that money, or may spend it later, or...
I think particularly the uncertainty is in testing 5, force main condition assessment. There's lots of what exactly is going to be the recommended field work is unknown until they do the assessment, and what type of pipe we have, what type of access do we have. That informs what they would recommend for solutions. So.
And then I see HDR's bid is 610
Versus 609 for the water.
HDR.
Oh, yeah, the other one was only 500.
Well, and so the 2 bids are within $1,000. $600.
They're within 500, practically.
Catherine did a really good job of scoping out the work in the RFP, and it was very easy to respond to that.
And there is a slight, in terms of what we're asking, the final negotiated amount is slightly higher than that from the proposal, and that both firms recommended that we have an additional task for project or program management. So just kind of do something targeted for that. So rather than taking money out of one of the other tasks, we added.
18,000.
That's why it's for, the agreement's for 638 versus 610.
Right, that's what I was asking. 20,000. And you mentioned, Steve, about it's on InfoNet. It goes to, it coordinates with our computer programs. That kind of eliminated some of the engineers that were going to bid on this, right? They didn't have the experience.
Yeah, it's not all collection systems, in fact, not a whole lot of them are using InfoNet. This type of a system, I would expect will be used more because of something Alan touched on, just the issue of asset management is really being encouraged by the oversight, the regulatory agencies. They're seeing from an idea that really began in the 2000s to be systematic about thinking of your system as a bunch of assets and, to Alan's point, over $200 million worth of replacement costs and being, and being more methodical about it. So using something like InfoNet creates this crosswalk between that principle of asset management and the day-to-day work orders that our crew executes and collects data and feeds it back into the system so that it can actually eyes in the field and data collection feeds back into the asset management prioritization. So it's novel in that it hasn't really been going on for more than a decade, if you ask me, based on my review of the statewide systems in my role. And I think it's exciting because it's a way to put dollars on the ledger for local government. Say, hey, this is something that's of value, even though we don't see it. It's not like parks and roads and schools, but they're very valuable and expensive to replace and critical to quality of life. And so, this is an important evolution. And these type of tools like InfoNet and having consultant teams that are familiar with these tools is really where we're going. And we think we're, not bleeding edge, but we're cutting edge, I think, by pursuing this approach to information management rather than planning.
So does this mean that at the end of this 2-year project, you'll have a decent, this can't be perfect, value? You said at the beginning when you introduced yourself, I don't know, you have hundreds of millions of dollars. At the end of this, will you be able to say, I think you have about $298 million worth of equipment underground, above ground, in the building? Do you have a...
We would definitely be able to have a good estimate if that is what you guys asked.
I think it would be,
we had all the data.
You advertise, you depreciate your capital. If you have a better idea of what things are valued, certainly that would help. It wouldn't hurt.
One of the outcomes of...
Should I just add $20,000 onto this now?
One of the outcomes of studies that are typical to this are, your long-term financial investment, your capital investment needs for your infrastructure. So every asset has a set useful life, and it has a replacement cost, and it has an installation date. So by taking up basic data, you can look at, when can I expect to have big replacement costs based on the average useful life of these types of assets, and then it gives you a much better understanding of what's coming up, so you're not surprised. So.
Yeah, and it feeds into the issue of rates. What does the ratepayer, or what do we need to ask the ratepayer to come up with to keep a sustainable system and have a defensible, transparent approach to doing that?
Yeah. And especially when you have new hookups and you're asking people to buy into the system, if you can say this is the value of the system, current value of the system is X.
Yeah.
That's why your hookup fee is what it is.
Any other comments?
I've got some questions. How many IAMP projects have you done?
Personally, I've done 2. The city of Stockton and Santa Barbara.
Were you the lead?
Yeah.
You were the lead.
Yeah, on the Santa Barbara one, I saw that through from beginning to end, including helping them negotiate their consent decree. And then the Stockton one, I picked up in the middle. It was started with somebody.
That was the whole city?
That was for their collection system for the city, for the municipal utility district. That's a very big district too.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so looking at the process, I noticed this was all done less than a month. Does that sound right? I know you sent out your RFPs and all that, but the decision process was finalized by February 21st, and you all met around the 24th of January, according to this report. So I'd like to know, you did it with an independent engineering consultant, and then 2 of our staff, right? Who are these people?
Yes, our independent consultant, we just hired Doug Humphrey as our sewer system management plan consultant, who actually helped invent the sewer system management plan concept when it was with Backwell back in the 2000s. he's a great consultant. And then Steve Mixes, our operations and maintenance manager, and myself.
So who is the independent engineer?
Doug.
All three. Okay, so there were 4 people.
There's 3.
Oh, that's right, sorry. So I questioned that because I was wondering, should we have waited a little longer? Because this is a big project. And I don't remember our IAMP being this pricey before. I remember $250,000 when Vivian did it. And I'm wondering, are we just redoing some of Vivian's work? I have some concern about all of that, and I know you've had some discussion. So would you like to comment to that effect?
It's not redoing, I think, because we're adding new elements, in terms of the manholes and the creek crossings.
So we didn't do
updating
some,
the
we didn't
hydraulic
do,
model.
so we didn't do everything. I
No,
thought-
we
I thought
didn't look at
had.
all our force mains, we sort of did desktop on our force mains.
Okay.
We looked at 5 of our 19 pump stations and detailed for 6.
Okay,
So we did this is kind of broadening it, looking to make sure we get comprehensive on everything, drawing on some of the past information. And I think Doug asked in the finance committee meeting too about the previous cost. But the 2013 IMP total was about $490,000 when we were done. And then we spent $114,000 about doing the force main condition assessment effort that we did joint with CMSA. So that looked at some of our force main infrastructure.
okay.
So combined, that's about $600,000 for those efforts.
So,
What would be the point of waiting? I don't understand.
well, there's only 2 people that actually came forward out of 5.
Well, it was kind of
Just
like
think of
combined.
And we're picking I think you're wanting to go with Alan, is it? Because he has this computer system. What did you say about the information system? I didn't get all of that.
This is just one element. Actually, both consultant teams were responsive to that. And it's, in my opinion, it's attractive work because we've been collecting a lot of data and we have this system. And so if there's consultants that are familiar with it, that would be really interesting work to do because it's so data rich, and what the previous IAMP, there was a lot of extrapolation of where we knew about some condition of the system in 2012, but there was a lot we didn't know. And that was a little more challenging. Yet, the low-hanging fruit were picked and addressed, so it was a successful effort. You can hear from Catherine's overview, it's from a budgeting standpoint similar.
You did an RFP process. You sent it out. I heard that it was a difficult RFP. There's a lot of elements to it.
Yeah, very complex.
And then what you did was you received 2 proposals. And then you had a team interview each consultant.
No, we didn't have interviews.
You had a grading sheet.
Yeah, we evaluated proposals.
And it was 3 responses, not 2. It's just that 2 of those companies merged togetere. So
No,
defined.
they applied together.
I would also say that I think there were probably at least 5 firms that were aware of this work coming up and that were interested in it, including Vivian. And we combined with West Jost to be one team.
Yeah.
And then the other team that responded was Brown Colo, and then the third team, they were aware of it, they just didn't reply to the RFP.
Yeah, the effort, having about 10 years experience as an engineering consultant, the effort to put together a proposal of this breadth and complexity is significant. It does not surprise me that we did not get 5 proposals because the budget and staff effort to put that together is quite significant. If you look at the actual proposal, I don't think I
I'm
have.
surprised Vivian didn't come back. We must have.
But they were both excellent, and there's a certain times of the essence. We need to get going on the work. We could spend a lot of time getting into the details of evaluation, doing interviews, second interviews. In the end, what's in the best interest for the district in terms of timing? There's as part of our business plan, we committed ourselves to getting this underway this fiscal year.
When does this start, the work?
April.
April.
Really quick,
And
yeah.
when is our cease and desist order gone?
I don't have an answer to that. I
The
can get
Regional
back to
Water
you.
Quality Board says it's gone.
It doesn't have a formal end date, there are pieces of it that have end dates.
This is not the one from 2006, right? This is the other one.
Yeah, yeah. There are elements of it that are supposed to be completed not later than certain dates of what the requirements are.
I would just say most of the things that this district has done since I was elected in 2012 that we are proud of stem from the IAMP that Greg Norby helped us initiate. And I remember him describing it to me simply in the earliest days and from the earliest data saying, Mary, we figured out if we fix 5% of the pipes, we're going to stop 50% of the spills. And I said, great, let's go obviously, let's go fix those 5% of the pipes. So I don't think we can underestimate the value of this work.
I'm not underestimating it, I'm just trying to
I wasn't implying that you were.
Oh, okay.
This is separate. I mean, and to think about, there's something more we can do with manholes that put smart covers on it, I can't wait.
Yeah.
I can't wait to hear about it. So.
Yeah, I like the smart covers, but any other option, especially those less expensive options that we heard up at CASA, because that more is more. We can't afford, well, we could afford, but the manhole covers are expensive. And we have a lot of manholes. So any other options I'm here for as well. I think that's a good idea.
Still 2 years, okay. Can we get a report maybe after 6 months? Because I'm really interested.
Budget for 2 reports.
Yeah.
Because I'm really interested to see the acuity level.
Yeah.
Because I remember when we did this before, we were in shock in some areas. If I remember correctly. So, okay.
Any other
Great idea.
comments?
We'll have updates.
Okay, great.
Any other comments?
No,
What's the wishes of the board?
I move that we consider authorizing the general manager upon review and approval of legal counsel to execute a master services agreement and initial task orders 1 through 5 with HDR Engineering Inc. in the total amount of $638,192 for infrastructure asset management plan update and program support services.
I'd second that with the caveat that we remove the words consider and simply authorize it.
Any further comment? All in favor?
Aye.
Bye.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. 2-minute break.
Yeah, I was going to say that. Let's have a break.
Thank you.
Meet back here at 10. Start up again. Let's go to agenda item 11, study session for sewer rates.
All right. Thank you, board. I wanted to give you a quick overview of where we've been before we get into starting with Mark Hildebrand, who I'm sure will be in the room.
We just went to the restroom.
That's okay. He'll miss a great working up for his talk. But we're presenting the board introduction to the study session here on sewer rates, and for discussion purposes only. No action is proposed to be taken by the board, but we invite direction. As staff, we invite direction from the board for the next steps. I'll start off with an overview of some historic data, and then we'll hand off to Mark Hildebrand, who actually has a rate model that he can use to demonstrate sensitivity of rates to different proposed expenditure plans. So we'll get into that. The purpose here, as I mentioned, is to present a history of our sewer rates and some options going forward. We're at the end of our 5-year rate period that began 5 fiscal years ago. It's coming to a close this June, and we need to tell the public where we're going from here. We're going to present and explain the assumptions behind the sewer rate model, so that there's some transparency to what we're proposing. We want to receive direction from you on a 5-year rate schedule, things like how to structure it. We want to inform the April draft rate study. So next board meeting we'll have a draft rate study. And we have the Prop 218 public notice that we need to issue in May for an adoption date in June board meeting, setting the stage for next fiscal year. What do sewer service charges fund? Really mostly operating expenses of the district, which are about 20 million annually. The largest expenditure is the CMSA treatment and debt service. There's also maintenance, repair, and inspection of our 190 odd miles of pipelines and 19 pump stations. We have 35 employees and salaries and benefits. We have various administrative costs. This we talked about a little bit today, like software. Facilities, utilities, insurance, board fees, and outside services such as legal, accounting, human resources, and community outreach. This graph shows the sewer rate history that I pieced together going back to 2005. And what I would like to highlight with this, on the y-axis is the dollar per year. That used to be in the 200 to 300 range in 2005. It's now in the 1,000 or 900 to 1,000 range. This shows both Larkspur and Ross Valley, which is the remainder. We can talk about why they're different a little later. I want to give you a little insight into where we've been. We really see patterns of these 3-year time frames where we had flat sewer rates followed by an abrupt increase in sewer rates, which is disruptive. And I'll show you a graph of what percent increases happened in those years. But this graph shows on the x-axis 05, 06 at the left, and then in 08, 09 there was a big increase. In 11, 12 another big increase, and then flat rates for 3 years, and each time. Over the last 5 years, the last time a big rate study was done, a direction was given to have a steady increase in rates to meet the needs of the IAMP, which we just discussed, to accomplish capital improvement, but also operational efficiency. There's a 7% average for both Ross Valley rate and the Larkspur rate. This graph shows a percent increase year over year between 2005 and 2019. I'll drill down into the right side of the graph on the next slide, but it's pretty remarkable. In 2008, Ross Valley rates were increased 80% and Larkspur rates were 60%. And then in 11-12, it was a 20% and over 45% increase. So just it's good to remind folks of the history of where we've been. And then you see this freezing of rates for a couple of years, right? And then the CDO was issued, and then we have the steady rate increase of about 7% annually. If you look at the last 5 years, again, no rate increases those 2 years prior to 14-15. And just to give you a flavor that Larkspur was increased proportionally higher to begin with, and then Ross Valley's had increases on the order of 7.5%, and Larkspur's have been less. So it's been both ways. The reason why Larkspur is higher is because we collect a portion of the property tax from the rest of Ross Valley. It goes to support our capital programs, and in Larkspur we get none of the property tax. And so to be able to pay for services in a commensurate way, Larkspur sewer service charges are higher, but they don't quite equal the property tax plus rates of the rest of Ross Valley at this time. This graph, I don't expect to go over it in detail, just that orange bar is the Ross Valley rate compared to our neighboring sanitary districts. So the current rate of $909 a year for a single family home is toward the median of all of the sanitary districts in the county. So where this is a repeat of that previous graph. See the question mark on the right? That is where do we go from here? Do we support a flat rate? Do we support the continuing 7% increases, or somewhere in between? And that's something for the board to consider, and we can use Mark's analysis and to help us decide where we go in the future. So here in March, we're presenting rate options and assumptions, and we want to inform the rate study, get your input. We're going to have the draft study report review in April, and in May we issue public notice of change sewer rates for Prop 218 requirements. In June we propose adoption of the new rate schedule for the next 5 years. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Mark.
Great. Thank you.
Is it the next slides?
Yeah, I think we'll have to go and get a different,
Pull up the
pull up
document.
the other document, which I can help do once you get situated, introduce yourself.
And this, the PowerPoints that we have, just this one and the next one are available on the website or will be, or?
The next one was part of your packet. The one that General Manager Moore just presented. We could probably get that up on the website as well. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Where do people usually present from the podium?
Oh, okay, it'd be,
Yeah, that would be a good place.
oh, do you have a jump drive or did you email something to us?
Yeah, I did send it, but maybe not. Did I send the PowerPoint or just the PDF? I can pull on.
Did you guys preload this?
Do you need flash drive?
Oh, I got a flash drive.
Yeah.
You can use this one.
Email over this computer yesterday during the minutes.
Oh, we did. Yeah, just use the flash drive.
Oh, okay. Yeah, one of the things you'll notice is we've always had a flat sewer rate. Until the last 5 years, we had a multifamily rate instituted. So along with that increased slope, that went along with the multifamily rate, which is roughly 90% of the single family rate. So to give an example, for this year, it's $909 for single family per year, $817 for multifamily per year. So 909, 817. In year one of the recent 5-year plan, the multifamily rates for both Larkspur and Ross Valley were roughly equivalent to the previous year's rates. So it almost constituted a 0% increase in rates for multifamily in 14-15, whereas the single-family rates did raise about 7 to 8% in that year one. So the multifamily rate is a new thing in Ross Valley, and SD2 and San Rafael Sanitation District do not have a multifamily rate.
Yeah. Thank you for the filler. That was very well done.
Yeah, I can talk. I appreciate it.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for all that. I actually didn't know Steve was going to put those slides together, but they're very helpful. They filled in some of the information that I probably should have had in my presentation. So today what we're going to do is we're going to look at the financial plan as it stands right now, and there's still some decisions to be made, so it's not final, but we did want to talk about it with the board and get some direction. Talk about what went into the financial model to get those numbers, just to give you some insight into what those numbers look like. And then talk about next steps once we've seen those results. So just to back up for a second, when we do a sewer rate study, there's 3 general steps that are followed. The first one is the financial plan, which is the focus of today's meeting, where we're really just looking at all the money that's coming in and all the money that's going out and figuring out how much in the way of rate revenue do we need going forward. Do we need to raise the rates? Do we need to keep them the same? And there's also decisions about debt financing and whether it makes sense to issue bonds or Srf loans or the like for your capital spending program. So that's really sort of the larger financial plan for the district. The next step is cost of service, and so that's when we look at your different customers and the way they behave and the cost of providing the service to them and how we should be allocating costs to those individual customer classes in ways that might not be identical because they behave differently, and in this case you have multifamily, single family, and non-residential. The biggest difference being and then you have high strength users. And so, the largest difference are the high strength users, which are generally the food establishments. But you also have a difference in your multifamily, single family, non-residential because of the correlation of the amount of sewage that they produce versus how much water they use. And that's called the return to sewer factor, when there's and that relationship of how much water you use versus how much sewage is going down the drain. So we'll talk a little bit about that in this meeting, but that'll be mostly the focus of the next meeting with you. And then the rate design is a decision of how do we want to collect, and the third part of the cost of service for you guys is also that tax revenue.
So you have some customers that contribute to property tax and others who don't. And how are we going to account for that when we design rates and collect revenue from your customers? And then the last piece is your rate design, which is how are we going to collect that revenue from those customer classes? So is it going to be fixed? Is it going to be volumetric based on water consumption? But again, today's conversation is mostly going to focus on this first block, the revenue requirements or the financial plan. So before we jump into where we're going, I wanted to take a second to look backwards. So one of the exercises I did was I looked at your 2014 rate study to get a sense of what they projected back in 2014. Where would we be in 2018? And obviously they didn't have a crystal ball, and I don't have one either for what's going to look like in 2022. But we can get lessons from where were they off and why. So one of the areas that they under projected was the CMSA costs are 6% lower than they were expected to be in 2018. And I looked at higher. In the report, they were low. Yeah, they are higher now than they were expected to be. And I looked at, so the CMSA costs are broken into two different components. There's your debt service, and then there's your operating costs that you contribute to. The debt service is actually slightly lower now than it was expected to be, and the operating cost is significantly higher. I don't have insight into their operations or their budget, so I can't share exactly why their operating costs are higher now than.
Well, but now they're going to be static, right?
3.5.
We now, that's changed. We're going to know what our CMSA costs are. Yeah.
And we have been in touch with their general manager, and he confirmed that 3.5% is the cost escalation we can expect from both the debt service and from the operating side.
Total?
Total. 3.5% on for their total CMSA bill.
And why do you think it was higher?
We know the debt's.
One of the reasons was that we got allocated a higher percentage cost because our flow was higher. And remember, they adopted this, the average of the 3 previous years. And so the first year, we were thinking we were going to get a 3.5% increase, but we actually got a 3.9% increase the first year. And I think that probably could account for some of it. I'm not sure if that becomes full of it.
The second thing that I noticed is that Ross Valley's O&M expenses are nearly 16% higher than they were expected to be, so almost $2.5 million more expensive. And one thing that I learned is talking to staff is that part of the reason is because you're now treating some of your salaries as an O&M expense, whereas you used to capitalize them. So it's not so much that those expenses went up as they're just being categorized differently. And then the capital spending over the past 3 years is very consistent.
Can you stop a second? Can I ask why? Why is that? Why has it changed?
We talked
I think
about
this is
I wasn't there.
This is a little more transparent way of really reporting our expenses. By putting salaries and benefits in capital expenditures associated with capital projects, we're not telling the full story about what it costs to employ, folks here at the district. And so, a couple of years ago, the decision was made. Was it 2 years ago, or?
About that, year or two.
It's recent. It's before I'm here, but I really see the value of this. Is let's not categorize salaries and benefits as a capital expense. Let's always put it in operating.
Okay, thank you.
even though they're working on capital projects, you said it's ongoing staff expenses, let's classify them as O&M.
Right. Good job. And that is an area in the industry that there's some discretion that you can use on whether or not you capitalize. And the reason that you would capitalize is primarily so that you can debt finance those expenses. That's one of the main reasons that you would want to capitalize those expenses. But if you're not using a significant amount of debt, you don't need that tool, then Steve's absolutely right that it's more transparent to just keep it as an O&M expense.
I don't think we use debt financing for those capitalized expenses, and our debt was, is that true?
Well, we would have used any of the bond revenues to pay down capital expenses and that could have
Including
been,
staff?
possibly, yeah. Yeah, I mean, they did.
Bond money paying staff wages?
When it was a capital expense.
If it's within a capital expense,
In
yeah.
other words, we could have a contractor build something and we could have our staff build something. If it's a capital item,
You can use the bond measure to pay for that
Right.
cost. That's what the bond is for.
capital revenues to pay that. We're not doing that now.
No.
I think this is better, and I believe what you said, is more transparent, more honest to the public.
Easier to follow, easier to track.
Yes.
Third point was that the capital spending that actually occurred over the last 3 years was very consistent with the plan from 2014. So I know you have that consent decree that you had to meet, and you had a plan for meeting it, and it looks like you executed on that plan. So I think that's a good story. A lot of these studies that I do, you look back at, the last study, and they had all these great ideas of the money they wanted to spend and projects, the investments they wanted to make, and problems they want to fix, and they don't get around to doing it. They don't have the ability to execute on the project. So, from my standpoint, that's a good story for the district that you were able to execute on that plan. And then the last piece is that your near-term capital spending is much higher than the historical average. So we're going to look at that here in a second. And that wasn't that was beyond the forecast of the last study, so it's not necessarily that they weren't expecting that, but just in looking at what the capital spending that we are, that you're spending this year and that you're expected to spend next year is significantly higher than the average. And we will look at that in a moment. Any questions about this slide? So here are your cash balances as of the beginning of this fiscal year, so that was back on July 1st. You have about $7.5 million in unrestricted cash, and then you have some other cash that's in your reserves. So you have about $11 million in your operating reserve, $2 million in your emergency reserve, and then you have a retiree benefit trust that you set aside some money. In addition, you also have $16.6 million in bond proceeds from the bond that you issued last year, which you drew down on last year, and you're continuing to draw down this year. So that 16.6 is expected to be used entirely, or almost like 90, most of that 16.6 million will be gone by the end of this fiscal year. And so when I show you the large capital spending we expect for this year, it'll also show you how much of that's being funded by debt, by these bond proceeds. So looking at the revenue side of the equation, I talked about the financial plan, looking at revenues and expenditures. On the revenue side, you can see that 72%, almost 73% of your revenue comes from your service charge, which is the focus of the study. 25% comes from that property tax, and then 2% comes from miscellaneous fees and other charges. And there's more detail over on the left there. On the expense side, this is all of your expenses, including capital and debt service. And I wanted to show you how big of a piece of the pie your capital is, because one of the functions of a district such as this one is to provide services and invest in infrastructure. And the fact that an organization with those size operating costs are able to deliver on that size of capital is also another good story for the district in terms of just the volume of capital that the district's able to deliver. You can see that your salaries and benefits are about 12%, and your CMSA operations and debt service combined is about 15%. So that would be your treatment costs, obviously. And your existing debt service is about 9%. So I'm going to show you some financial results soon, and before I do that, I just wanted to give you an idea of some broad assumptions that we made. So we took those expenses, sort of freeze frame this year, and then we had to project those out into the future. We had to make some assumptions about how those costs are going to change over the next 5 to 10 years. So our general cost escalation that we applied to most of your O&M was about 3%. Your CMSA cost escalation was 3.5% based on information that we got from the agency. And then your property tax revenue escalation we assumed was going to be 4.1%, and that was based on looking at historical changes in property value over the last 5 years. That number is actually rounded down a little bit. The actual number that I found was 4.6%, but I think that we just went through a pretty high period of property valuation that might slow down here, so I didn't want to be overly optimistic about that source of revenue. In terms of bonds and SRF loans, we are proposing that a bond be issued, a $30 million bond be issued this year for short-term capital needs. And so the terms of that bond were assumed to be 4% and the payback period of 25 years. And we are not assuming to receive SRF loans at this time, but we had considered it momentarily, and it could still be something that we put in the model just to see what those look like. And we assume a 2% interest. In reality, sometimes you can get an even lower rate than 2%. But again, I didn't want to be too optimistic about that.
And that slide, of course, is a little different from the one we have in our packet.
Correct. Yeah. Oh, that's different from the one in your packet?
We had 4 years, 4% at 30 years.
Okay.
2% at 25 years.
Okay. Sorry.
We talked about that, I think.
We did, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you changed it in response to the
That's right.
finance committee.
Yeah, and I didn't resend it. Yeah, I apologize. You're right.
We actually changed it.
So here is that graph I was talking about with the capital spending. So you can see historically 2016, 2017, and even last year 2018, you spent 10 million and 8 million, then about 20 million. And then this current year, you're spending about $30 million. And next year, you're expected to spend about $35 million. So that's a huge spike in your capital spending. And one of the themes that we talked about with staff and with the committee was that the district in general is interested in going to a pay-go model where you stop issuing debt for your projects and that you are able to pay as you go, cash financing. And that is very appropriate for a period of time that looks like this, where your capital spending is relatively stable and flat, and you can get to a point with your rates where you can cash finance everything. But when you have a spike like this, it's really hard to put rates in place that can pay for that unless you've seen it coming 10 years ahead of time and you raise your rates to get your reserve levels high enough so that you can cash finance it. But if it pops up on you, or if you just happen not to have those reserves when the time comes, it's really hard to get through a period like this without issuing debt. So we will be recommending that you issue a $30 million bond in order to get through this spike right here. I did indicate that one of the reasons for the spike is the Comcast building, which is an outlier as expenses go. It's not the type of thing that the district can expect to encounter regularly, so it makes sense that you would have a spike. And then the Larkspur cleanup also is something that's unusual for the district. So it's not representative of a poorly managed utility that's experiencing a catastrophe. It's simply two projects that happen to pop up at the same time.
And how are these, after 2020, how are these lower level of capital expenditures estimated? If we don't have the IAMD yet, that we approved earlier than that?
We have pump station enforcement improvements that are forecast and are moved out and around in that window. And then the gravity sewer is a 2 mile a year.
Yeah, so to a certain extent, somewhat of a placeholder that can be refined through the IAMD.
But expected to be dramatically lower than what we're doing currently.
Does that meet our expectation for our Cs and leases?
We'll need to renegotiate. There's a 4-mile per year requirement, but with how much we've replaced, we sort of versus what do we have left to replace, I don't think we have trouble.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. The IAMB and the InfoNet, all those tools will help us justify those changes to the current cease and desist order.
So, I mentioned this already verbally, but here's a slide that talks about that debt strategy. So we are proposing a one-time $30 million revenue bond at the 4% interest. And then going forward, we are proposing rates that will allow you to get to a point where you can follow a pay-as-you-go model, assuming that about $8 million per year in capital spending. We did not include SRF loans in our assumptions for a couple reasons. They are very interesting to get. It's very cheap money in terms of interest rates. I did some research on this subject for a different project recently, and the hit rate, the percent of projects that actually get funding who apply the first time around is below 20%. It's around 18% of the projects actually get it. Another 40% or so go onto our wait list, and then almost 50%, or rather, sorry, another 40% or so simply get denied. Right now, the SRF loan program is on hold indefinitely for the next 6 months. They have a backlog that they're trying to wade through. So for reasons like that, it really doesn't make sense for a financial plan to assume, hey, we're going to get an SRF loan in 3 years, because you just can't count on them. That being said, if you can get your hands on them, it's not something I would turn down, because it's not, it's relatively cheap money. But given this strategy and the fact that you're going for pay-as-you-go, I don't know, it's quite a bit of work, staff effort to put in for these SRF loans. So I don't know if that's where the district wants to spend that's where the district wants to spend its efforts and its time, is chasing after SRF loans, when in fact, if we move forward with the proposed plan, you'll have the rates in place to be able to cash finance anyway.
We do want to try to get them.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. But I would support Mark's point. When I worked at the State Water Board, we were, as of 6 months ago, sitting on $7 to $8 billion in applications, and the maximum we've successfully been able to, at the state level, move in terms of loans and agreements is about $1 billion a year, and that was really pushing everyone's bandwidth. And that was what they're planning to do when I was leaving, was try to keep the $1 billion a year pace. Well, you can do the math. With a $7 to $8 billion backlog, it takes a while to whittle away at that. And there's really no end in sight as far as demand for infrastructure improvements. So without a big influx of federal capitalization and staffing at the State Water Board to process the application, there will be a bottleneck, and there won't be as high a probability.
Yeah.
So even the fact that I used to work there, it won't be.
So we're sorry.
But there is an advantage to disadvantaged communities, which I don't think is not valid. So that is another challenge.
That's right.
Okay, so here's the same level of spending, but expressed as debt. So what you see here is that in 2018 and 2019, these two dark bands are the debt that you already issued. So that's how much of your capital program was paid for by debt. This is essentially, the dark band here is essentially that 16 million that I mentioned, the bond, or the part of your current cash reserves that came from the bond proceeds. And then this dark area, and then a little bit going into 2021, would be the new $30 million bond that we're proposing. In terms of your reserve policies, the district currently has 3 reserves. One of the reserves is sort of a 2-part reserve, but you have 3 reserve policies that were adopted by the board. and our formal board, our formal reserve policy targets for the district, which is great because it's the type of thing that rating agencies look at. They want to see a district that has these types of policies in place where you know how much money you want to have in your reserves and you target it and you actively make sure that you maintain those levels in your financial plans. So the first one that you have is the operating and maintenance fund reserve, and it's about $9 million. The way that it's worded right now is that it's equal to, which months is it? It's July to December?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's equal to your operating budget from July to December of that year is the target that you maintain. And the reason that's worded that way is because that's sort of your drought in terms of revenue that you get from the county, and so that's the period of time you want to make sure that you can pay for through that reserve. So that's about $90 million. You also have an emergency reserve, which the purpose of this reserve is catastrophe. If a pump station fails or if you have a huge sinkhole or something that needs to be fixed immediately, you want to make sure that you have cash on hand to be able to hire a contractor and pay them and get the work done as expeditiously as possible. The third reserve is your capital improvement replacement fund balance. So this one is a little bit more, has more flexibility to it. And the purpose of this type of reserve is to try to account for things like that spike right there, right? So you want to be able to smooth out $1 or $2 million spikes in your capital spending program. You're never going to be able to account for a spike like that with that type of reserve, but you can account for spikes like this. And so the capital improvement replacement fund balance is really to allow you to pay as you go without experiencing great spikes when those little capital spending spikes occur. Okay. So at this point, I wanted to hook up my computer and show you what the financial plan looks like and the rates. I'm just going to show you this slide really quick because as we go through that, I do want to sort of share with you that some of the priorities that were expressed to me by the committee and by the staff was obviously we're trying to keep rates as low as we can. We need to continue to execute on the capital execution. We talked about pay-as-you-go, and then we want to maintain a reserve level. So those are the four sort of moving parts that we're trying to balance as we make decisions about how much to raise rates by and when and how to issue debt. So sorry for Steve. You got anything to say? While
In Lake Elsinore, the local town is overrun by tourists who have found out they look online to see where to go for wildflowers. And the poor little town of Lake Elsinore has been overwhelmed by tourists coming in to see the poppies. So they've actually told the people to go away. Which I have.
Is there a sewer system over there?
So that was my
That's what happens to
Western Riverside.
What's the restaurant town in Sonoma, which is the city? People would, no, it's a very small town. But anyway.
It's in the house.
Okay, unfortunately, I can't remember the town, but they have 2 or 3 giant restaurants. And the town is probably got 250 people. And then they serve 1,000 meals or something. And the sewer system takes days to recover. I'll think about it.
Yeah, California.
Much smaller. It's a town of about 200 people. 300 people.
Oh, maybe Occidental.
Occidental.
And that begins with the C.
Yes. The first consonant. The second and third.
The Union Hotel.
Yeah.
For the board's pleasure, we, the financial committee, spent a lot of time on this. So again, that meeting went about 2.5 hours or something like that, 2 hours. And a lot of it was working on this, because these are assumptions. And that's what's nice about this software and Mark's ability to input data, because I think we put in some data that we hadn't had. I can't remember which ones we added, 300,000 a
We
year.
added,
The revenue from Comcast.
Revenue, Comcast rent possible, or proposed, is now put in there. The cost of Larkspur Landing cleanup is there, but no value of Larkspur Landing sale is there. So that is a very conservative activity, which, should benefit us in the future, but we don't want to count our eggs.
we don't know whether.
And we don't know if the citizens may all demand it to be a dog park. I don't know.
Can the whole board see the presentation okay from where you're sitting?
I think you should put more data on that.
We're data driven. I'm sorry it's so small, so I'll point the numbers out and make them seem bigger.
And feel free to move around too, I mean, if you need to get.
Yeah, if you want to get closer.
Take a closer look at the
Yeah,
spreadsheet.
there's seats right here.
This is good information that Mark's put together.
Yeah, this is a study session,
Yeah.
we can play with the numbers, we can get closer to the screen and try out different scenarios.
So what you're looking at here is sort of your cash flow projection for the district over the next 11 years. And what you have here, the columns are your revenue and the columns are your expenses, and the background green is your revenue. So the dark here is your O&M. The striped here is your debt, and the dark blue here is your cash capital. It's almost you're paying cash capital, right? So in the backgrounds, the base dark green here is your your property tax revenue. Your light green is how much you're collecting from your existing rates. And then the dark green is the additional rate revenue that we'll be getting if we implement the rate increases that are being proposed. So it's hard to see, but down here are the rate increases. So what we have in the model right now is 4.9%, 4.9%, 4.5%, 3.7%, and then 3.95% for the rest of the planning period. So the way to interpret this is that any year where the expenses are greater than the revenues, you're going to be drawing down on your reserves. And I mentioned that you currently have $7 million in cash above your reserve targets, and so you have some cash to spend there. And this graph shows that. So the red line is your actual reserve levels. The black line here is your O&M reserve plus your emergency reserve. So it's those two reserves that I mentioned were two reserves that you'd like to not go below at all. The dashed line here is the incremental reserve target that you would add with the capital improvement reserve. So I mentioned that that's what the reserve that you can play with, that you can dip below and go above, and the whole reasons give you some flexibility. So you can see that you're well above your reserve targets right now, but because of the large amount of capital spending that you'll be doing, you're drawing down on those reserves and going to the minimum reserve target here by 2021. Then you're hovering between just above your minimum reserves for 6 or 7 years or so, and then out here we do dip below the reserve target, and we can talk more about that. But that's beyond. We're only looking at 5 years of rate increases, and so what happens way out here, there's so much uncertainty that it's really not too much of our concern. But that's the general picture. So we can play around with the rate increases and even the amount of debt that we issue, we can play around with that. But before we do any of that, are there any questions about what we're looking at here? Are any of these numbers not make sense?
I have a question. That percentage increase,
Yeah.
does that take into account for the CMSA?
Yes.
Yes.
It does?
Everything, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, all the expenses
So
are in
it's
there.
average about 5%,
Average is just over 4.
just over
Yeah,
4?
yeah, because we go 4.9, 4.9, 4.5, 3.75, 3.9.
Okay, I didn't see this.
So these numbers are just hypothetical to try to fit the curve. I think, right, Mark? So this is just one hypothetical rate schedule.
That's right.
It might be interesting to look at, if we just kept the current rate increases of about 6.5%, what would that do? And then as one boundary condition, and we also could look at just flat 0% increases, and what does that do to our cash reserves? Those would be two scenarios that we could run through the model, just to give an idea of
I think
boundaries.
the phrase you're using is bookends.
Yeah, like
So the high end would be 6, which we don't want to do. We've
6.5.
talked about a lot of times. 0 is what we've talked about we can't do. So that's
Yeah, I think 6.5, because that's what last year's was.
Right, so I plugged in the 6.5, I'm gonna hit F9 for the calculate now.
Could we get some of this printed out and sent after?
Yes,
Mhm.
yes, we can.
Yes.
So now what does that do to our cash reserves, to have 6.5 in the next 5 years?
So what I didn't do that in perpetuity. This was a number I was playing around with. Do you want to see 6.5 in perpetuity?
Yeah, at least for the first 5 years, because that's what we're talking about. But you can do-
So this shows 4 years, so let's do it for 5 years.
You want to link that chart to this one. You're going to do it twice.
So if we,
so that red shows a lot of money that we have that we're not spending. We're making money.
Well, it shows
This-
our reserves.
Extra reserves.
Yeah.
so as you're drawing down, you're getting just to your minimum target, and then you'll get back up to your target reserves by 2023, and then you'll start having reserves, excessive reserves beyond that time.
Wait a
You
second,
had-
Mark, why is, did you do that first year, what fiscal year is that, the second, yeah, that one, what fiscal year is that?
That would be July 1st coming up. That would be raising rates 6.5% in 3 months from now.
Okay, so we don't get advantage of any of the revenue from the rate increase then, because it's down right at the minimum there.
It's done next year.
Right here, right, yeah, so that capital spending, that big spike of capital spending is too large for, and changing the course of this line, I liken it to like a B-52 bomber, it takes a lot of,
Yeah.
it's got a lot of momentum in it, so it doesn't, 1.5% increase isn't gonna, it's actually just slowing down the fall at this point rather than,
But it's about the same with
It wasn't that long.
Well,
because it doesn't,
could you toggle, I know, one thing is if everybody pays attention when he toggles to the previous, you get an idea of the change.
so, to the, what I had in here.
Yeah, the one you had total.
Yeah,
Because he did it, and then it changed, but everybody was looking at it away at the time.
okay.
His fingers never left his hand. His fingers never left his hand.
All right, so this is
No, keep it on.
5 years of 6.5%. So now I'm going to hit F9 with the, what I calculated to be about an average of 4.3% over time.
Boom. You see that?
so the first year, we don't get the impact.
Because our capital program is still growing holistic.
Actually, this is we get the revenues to the next fiscal year.
Oh, okay.
And now it shows 0.
So if we were to keep sewer rates flat like they did in Cincinnati this year, I'm very proud of it. What does that do to our red line?
So,
Oblivion.
well, and the other one showed it going up where we're having too much capital expenditure.
Right.
So it's the story of the 3 bears. One's too much, one's too little. One seems just right.
Yeah. Yeah, so you can see you go below, you can go negative in about 2024. But even before you go negative, you have 2 problems. One, you're below your reserve targets. And 2, your debt coverage, which we didn't talk about, but your debt coverage ratio, or your debt service coverage ratio, is a measure of how easily you can pay for your debt, and it's something that rating agencies look at. And if they perceive that you have or you've had, or they a low debt coverage ratio, it can affect your rating and your ability to obtain low interest.
Not only that, we make a promise, we covenant,
Right.
to pay 1.25, and if you miss your covenant,
Right.
you're in technical default.
Yeah.
Or you could be in technical default.
Well, we also looked at the,
But we have a 1.5 policy coverage.
we have a credit rating history from 13, was it to 13 and then
I've got
14, it's gotten better each time.
So the 13 bonds were rated A, the 14 bonds were rated A+, and the 18 bonds were rated AA-. And we've had preliminary indications that we'll get upgraded if we pass a reasonable rating. Again,
And to what do you, we were talking about possible AA.
well, we are. And maybe
We're double A right now.
plus. We're AA-.
So it could be as much as AA plus.
We could be AA+.
Double A plus is right below triple A minus, so that's, no, that's good.
So does anybody want to see any other specific rate increase
There's only
scenarios?
an infinite number, so we'd like to see.
I think this is good news. Right? 4.9 to 3.75 over the next 5 years gets us what we need with $25–30 million in bonding that
Yeah.
we're already, kind of wrapping our heads around, because that helps us buy the building too, right? Yeah, it's
And
not.
again, the largest possible sale is not in this. Mary.
I know, again,
Yeah.
because we've been, yes, hoping for that for so long.
We haven't voted on it, but the 30 million is calculated, Larkspur Landing is $7.5 million. We're committed to do that.
Oh,
The building is 13 million, which we've used our reserves, and we want to reimburse those. In the CMP, we've talked about that, Butterfield Road and Royal Road is a key one. In other projects, there's about 9.5 for that, adds up to 30 million. And then we don't have to sell any more bonds, which I've been trying to. Hoping we could
no
do
matter
for
how much
years,
you
yeah.
love bond counties.
Well, again, this came to a meeting I went from the similar agency last night, which doesn't want to do bonds, and they want to increase rates significantly. But it's not fair, because you're talking about infrastructure repair that people who move here in 20 years will enjoy.
Right.
They should be paying part of that, and that's what a bond debt is all about. It's not sticking the current resident. And again, on an earlier slide, we saw a couple of times when previous boards didn't raise the rates for a number of years, which again is not good for your bond rating, but also requires you to have these spikes.
These jumps.
And those jumps are not fair to the citizens either.
No
And
credit.
what you're also doing is you're giving people who live in those 3 years who maybe move out, they got a free pass.
Okay, but also Mark showed us when you use bonds to fund spikes, and when you have pretty level capital, it's folly to fund every single year with a bond.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so that's our plan, is we've got these spikes that we're looking at in capital, and then we're kind of leveling out our capital. And we have that spike there. If you notice our red line over there dips below our reserve, but maybe by then we'll have some resolution of what's going to happen in March.
And not only that, it's possible, we've been saying this all along, but with all of the work we're doing, our flow to CMSA may be lower, and therefore our cost is
See,
lower.
I think our capital so far, Catherine can tell me I'm wrong, but I think what we've allowed ourselves to do is pump more wastewater to CMSA.
Right.
Increasing
Not leaking out, yeah.
Increasing our percentage share of the capital of CMSA budget. And now I see on our IAMP that we're going to do I&I reduction. We really haven't concentrated on that yet. We've fixed pipes, but we haven't gone after it. There's like that boardwalk we saw in that. Leaking salt area.
Oh, yeah.
So you raise a good point. You see this dip below here, and then it comes back up and recovers. As your consultant, I'd rather have this dip happen, starting up here and then dipping down to your minimums and then coming back here. That's the purpose of this buffer, is to account for these dips and to try to keep the dip from going below the dark line. And you can see why it happens. It's this spike in 2026 that's driving it down, and then you recover. So
And what is that spike in 2026?
Pump stations.
It's a
So small lift
CIP.
stations that haven't had major improvements yet,
Okay.
and that's something The update is at the phase.
You know, are you going to show,
Thank
that, Catherine's done a detailed capital improvement program, Catherine and staff, and are you going to put that in the future, like the next 9-year those numbers?
Yeah,
Maybe in the appendix of your report or something.
yeah, sure, they'll all be listed, all those
Yeah,
projects.
have all the projects listed,
Yeah.
because I think it shows where those numbers came from. The other thing we did was this includes funding the OPEB.
Yep.
We funded for 5 years, 6 years, 5 years? 5 years, and I think 50,000?
Yep.
I can't do it. And we pay off our unfunded.
Unfunded liability.
And this plan also includes a 12-year payout, right, Mark? of
Pension or,
our,
outstanding pension
unfunded
liability.
pension, and gets it down to 0.
And it's paying debt service the whole time too, right? All the debt
Yeah.
service we're required to pay.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting to think of PAYGO as paying for debt service.
Well,
It has to.
the best program is you fund the spikes and you do pay as you go and then ongoing capital.
As much as you can, yeah. And again, another thing that I appreciate about this district is that it's a very rare story to hear that there's a 10-year or a 5-year and a 12-year plan to pay down your OPEB and your pension liabilities. That's a very rare story right now. So, kudos for taking that on and addressing it.
We invested in this Gov Invest program to analyze those, and it's really worth it.
Yeah.
That's how we calculate it all.
Okay. Yeah.
Some of that software.
Some of the
Some more of
software.
that expensive. So what would it take to get rid of that red line dip? And that starts in fiscal year, I guess we should go.
Seller.
One SRF loan for one project.
Yeah.
In terms of rates or in terms of?
What did you say, Catherine?
One SRF loan for one project.
One SRF line. A wig and a prayer.
We got 5 years to work on it.
Or it would be front loading the rates a little bit more and then dropping them off. Because you can see it's heading up here, which we don't need that slope either. So if we front loaded some rates, maybe put 4.5 here and then drop these, we could play around with it so that you would keep the red line in this area the whole time. And I could tweak those numbers.
Is what you have there your software, or is that an Excel spreadsheet?
Spreadsheet. Yeah. But it's just a guess and check. But we can just try that for 2 years and then maybe drop these down to 3.5 in the out years. So that flattened it a little bit. So I keep doing
Couldn't
that.
tell the difference.
Oh, that's great.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just,
Move the app to use,
sorry.
like move the app to use.
Yeah, I increased these two up to 4.5%, and then I dropped these at 3.5%. So, let me see.
So we're getting close to a 1 hour mark. One thing, this has been great, and we, as he's playing around with these numbers, this fits the category of board direction, That is, Mark's going to go back to work for this month, and so right now is a great time to weigh in on things we'd like him to consider, because our proposal is to have a draft study report in a month.
Could we have options, like maybe 3 scenarios? And that way, that would help me. That's how we did it last time. We had 2 or 3 scenarios. So that for the shock and awe of that. But I have a question, but it might be too
Sure.
soon.
3 scenarios, that's
Yeah.
a good idea.
Yeah.
Rate increase scenarios?
As long as we pay the bills, I'm not going to, well, you can have a scenario that doesn't pay the bills, but I think it's worthless.
Yeah,
As long as
so,
they pay the bills.
yeah, we could look at, reserve target. So, using this tool, we could give it assumptions, about outcome goals. So we would say, the capital reserve target scenario, and the minimum reserve level scenario, and then, even the flat rate scenario, it's not one you necessarily would choose based on what we've talked about, but it can be put out there.
That's my next question, because I sent you this article on volumetric. And I believe Greg brought it up in the past, but it was too expensive, and I don't know, but I mean, Nevada's doing it. I would really like us to at least look at the model, or maybe I don't know if there's an
What's it
integrated volumetric pricing, and California would save water and money. That's where things are going.
So,
But they're, yeah, I know it's expensive, but I think,
yeah, go ahead.
you actually have more experience on this, and if there's any way we could tweak it to start the process, I just think it would make the public feel good about spending extra money, and that we're taking more of a conservation way. Go ahead.
Oh, good, and there are benefits, and the article you sent me from the NRVC, they looked statewide at how wastewater agencies do their rates, and really it is, as you know, not a high percentage that use volumetric base. They're mostly flat rates, like what this district has done historically. I actually, in response to your question, I contacted Sandy Carpal, the general manager of Nevada Sand, and we had a good discussion today. And it works well for them, but their setting is conducive to it because the sanitary district jurisdiction overlaps very strongly with the North Marin Water District. And so it's fairly straightforward for them to get data on water use for their customer base from North Marin. And actually this system was set up in the 70s. So they've been doing it for generations, whereas all the other sanitary districts in Marin County don't. Now, how is it set up? There's a low water use category and an average and a high water use category. And it's based each year on actual data. So they have the ability to get more real-time data. They have what's known as AMI, or automated metering instrumentation. Is that the right term? I had it here. You ever heard of AMI? It's basically like smart meters for water. Well, Marin Municipal Water District doesn't have that. They're looking at doing it. But currently, what Sandeep's advice was, is it might make sense to look at this eventually, but when Marin Municipal Water District implements AMI technology, it will create a lot less work for our staff. He was saying that for our district, we would probably need to hire a full-time employee for 6 months. So like eventually a half-time employee, this court forward on collecting this data and making sure it's accurate and can support the fees that we would charge people. So it's not out of the question, and to Board Member Meng's point, there are benefits there. It does send a signal for conservation. It doesn't, and it has been successful up in the Novato area. So there's ancillary benefits. But I'll caution about wastewater. We don't always benefit from conservation. I don't think it's a big deal. I don't encourage us to fight back on conservation whatsoever. But it can create some logistical challenges for wastewater agencies. For odors, scouring of debris through the sewer system, not insurmountable challenges, but incremental challenges that wastewater collection agencies throughout the state have been able to quantify impacts monetarily that have gone into solving problems because people use less water. I just make a cautionary note that there's sometimes unintended consequences of good policy decisions. So that's a little bit of an overview. It's a system that's worked for them for years. But I would suggest we don't necessarily bundle that in this comprehensive package now, that we can maybe commit to looking at this, especially if Marin Municipal does advances in automated metering. Then we can really maybe team with other sanitary districts and do more of a county-wide review of this, because there are good reasons to do it.
It's fair.
And there's a way that people can feel it's fair. Another cautionary note, though, is that our system costs are mostly fixed and not volumetric based. And so really what the ratepayer does is it buys into a system that enables them to flush the toilet, use a washing machine 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. No matter where you are in our system, you have access to that system. So it's not the amount of water that goes in, it's the simple access to the system, and that's a fixed cost, not based on flow. So that's the reality. I know it feels like, oh, we only flush our toilet a couple times a day, why am I paying as much as this family of 6? Well, it's because you're paying for a connection to a system, not on capacity.
You know, the biggest cost for us that's flow-based is completely beyond our control. It's I&I.
Yes.
And it isn't related to a low-volume user or a high-volume user. Our average dry water flow is just below 4 MGD or something like that. And our peaks flows are in the 50 MGDs, 55.
All our peaks? Oh, yeah, that's right, because we're going to have something in back from what Sam was saying.
You know, and so that's why our percentage
And God don't pay bills.
CMSA went up, is because of we're pumping more wet weather to them, and it's a killer.
Yeah.
I mean, well,
How do you allocate
we'd
that?
love to get,
How do you allocate that?
Metering.
well, it isn't based on how much you contribute to the
That's
system.
right, but there's no way to, how would you charge the flow of that additional 50 million gallons a day?
Well, we
on
do
peak
it now. We do it
Because
now.
we have fixed rates. So that's my.
It's not unsimilar to the, you know, my house was built in 1904. We haven't had to have the fire department come out in 100 and some odd years, yet I pay the same amount for fire as everybody else because it has a capacity at 3 o'clock in the morning that somebody can call Steve Mixus and say, please come to my house, I smell an odor. And his operation, and it may never happen, but everybody pays the same for that possibility.
Yeah.
Mill Valley did that biometric, didn't they?
Yeah, they did.
How did that go?
5 or 6 years ago, they lost, I believe, 25% of their revenue in the first year. And UC Davis, not UC, but the city of Davis tried it. And they ended up changing their rates
That's
about
right.
5 times in 7 years because it was such a problem. And the final result of it was that they put a cap on how much, you know, you count for sewer. And I think it was 1,600 cubic feet by monthly, which is 8 MGD. I mean, 800 cubic feet a month. I'm pretty sure that's what it was. And because people were getting murdered who were watering their gardens. And around here, we're watering.
He said big And his RVSD considered it. I remember when I was running in 2012, Peter Sullivan saying, like, oh, we have to consider this, some mixed model of flow and it's been floating around for a while. Can we move on?
Well,
Can we get thinking again?
So I wrote down a note, and it's an interesting topic. I've got my own thoughts on it, but I think you guys did a good job of covering most of the issues, so I'll move on. Let's see. I took down notes that you'd like to see different scenarios. I wasn't sure exactly what sort of scenarios we're talking about. We're talking about different debt service or, you know,
Different rate.
different
Rate, percentage rate.
rate percentage, what that might look like. Okay, that's easy. Anything else from any other thoughts on the financial plan before we?
So the range of percentage increase on the 5-year period we're talking about, I took down is 4.9 to 3.75.
Those were the ones, yeah. That was-
Did those numbers obviously plugged in do something to some line in the graph, right?
Right.
What do those flatten out or smooth out for us?
What are they, so the line that was changing was your cash reserves, you know, how much you have in the bank at the end of the year.
And that's what that's what that variation helps
Yeah,
smooth out.
that line. And so what I was trying to do was find a way to pick the right rate increases in the right years so that you keep your reserves kind of in the sweet spot, just above your minimum reserves, but, you know, not excessively above your target reserves.
Then why don't you do a scenario like that, all the way out, not have that dip?
Yeah, that would just stay in that area.
And then also, I mean, when I see that variation, in terms of communicating to the public, I would say, what if we just said we were going to have, 4.5% increase every year for the next 5 years? Would that do the same thing to that red line, just for simplicity's sake?
Right.
That's sort of what we ended up with last time we did this, 5 years ago. We debated about a percentage increase.
Yeah.
So anyway, and I don't know if 4.5.
It was 7%.
It was higher. I mean, I think this is great news. I like these percentages.
Yeah, no, these are good.
So if it's 4.5 or whatever it is, if we could have that message that
Yeah, flat.
this is, each of the next 5 years, you can expect this
Sure,
same
so that you're
very
not, so you don't have to deal with 5
simplistic
different,
number. Yeah.
small variations of the same number.
Yeah, that would be
that's
my
fine.
only idea.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts?
What is the construction CPI?
I don't know off the top of my head.
It's in the range of about 3%.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's-
Currently,
Currently? The CPI right now is 3.2, I believe.
Construction, sorry. Construction CPI.
Construction, I
That's
believe.
what you're saying, it's your saying.
And that's
Sorry,
a,
the
Yes, the
CCI,
CCI.
what I meant, the
that's a
EMI.
capital one. And it's
Yeah, but cost of living, I mean, I get where you're going with it, right? Like,
Right.
yeah, kind of like, things in the world increase
That's right.
at these
And in
increments.
our industry, they go higher because construction costs go higher than the normal consumer price index. Yeah, that's right.
So, last slide, this is switching gears entirely from the financial plan. This is looking down the road towards the rate structures and the different decisions that you'll have facing you the next time we meet. And I just wanted to start to get some thoughts from you. The first one isn't really, just to let you know that what we're doing with this structure, or what I was instructed, or the conversation that we had, is we're pretty much keeping exactly the same rate structure that you currently have in place. It's not broken, don't fix it. So right now, you charge based on hoops, you charge based on EDUs for all of your accounts. A single-family home pays 1 EDU for the home. They pay more if they have an accessory dwelling unit. And a multi-family home pays 0.89 of an EDU per unit. And commercial, their EDUs are calculated based on their wintertime usage, based on an assumption that a single-family home typically uses 215 gallons per day, and so you do the calculations to figure out how many equivalents to a single-family home those commercial accounts are. There's also a strength factor that's multiplier of 2.34 that's assigned to your high-strength customers. And then the rate also changes depending on the location, if you're in Larkspur or in Ross Valley, based on that property tax credit that we talked about. So we'll talk about that one first. The Larkspur rates. Right now when I do the math, the Ross Valley rates are not, the difference between the Ross Valley rates and the Larkspur rates do not account for all of the property tax that you're currently collecting. So in other words,
Larkspur's getting a deal.
Larkspur's getting a deal in a way. Property tax is something that you have, is at your discretion of how to use. You don't have to use it in one way or another. It's money that came on. There's no law that requires you to use it in one way or another. One very strong logical argument would be that you should give it back it should credit it to the people who paid it in the first place. So it should go entirely to the Ross Valley customers, and Larkspur should pay full rates. Basically, the idea is that you're using the property tax revenue from the Ross Valley customers to subsidize the Ross Valley customers to keep their rates down. Right now, there is a gap between what the difference in the rate is, and it amounts to about $420,000 per year is the amount that is not reimbursed to or credited back to the Ross Valley customers. And it equals about $146.
You're saying that Larkspur's total commitment to Ross Valley Sanitary District, any average ratepayer, is paying about $146 a year less than the very same person across the street that's in the Ross Valley Sanitary District. but not Larkspur.
It would be an addition, if it were done to completely recover the revenue, the property tax, it would be an additional $146 less for Ross Valley customers.
Less for Ross Valley, more for Larkspur.
Correct, it should be, well, it goes both ways, they'll move in opposite directions. One will go up by, a certain number of dollars, the other will go down, because it's a zero-sum game, so.
Okay.
I think what we're just talking about is, right now we have a difference of about 270, that's something like that, $270. And you calculated that it should be something like, it was 400 and something. The property tax collected in Ross divided by the number of EDUs in Ross equals $420. And now we're only collecting 200.
But Mark, we can't change, we can't refund the people. We're getting 3%, is it 3%? 3% of the ad valorem?
Well, no.
3%.
In Ross Valley. What are we getting from the cities? From
Under 1% is my guess.
It is what it is. I don't think we can change that. So we can't refund. There's no refunds.
Correct.
So that's staying the same. We're talking about increasing the rates. So now we're just talking about closing the gap, which would mean not crediting Ross Valley and increasing Larkspur, but simply increasing Larkspur.
Right, that's, yeah.
You have it.
I don't want to lower the
We can't lower the ad valorem. It is what it is. We get a percentage.
No, and I understand.
We don't want to
that.
lower the sewer service charge.
But if you look at, say we weren't doing any rate increases or anything, and you simply wanted to fix this gap,
You'd increase.
if you simply increased one customer, you'd now be collecting more revenue than you used to be. So it's not a,
That's the point.
you need to have a result where there's no net impact.
No.
Because then now you're collecting more.
Well, that's what that's the whole point of this rate increase. And what,
Right, but
the impact is that we have to raise our rates less
Correct.
across the
Well,
district.
we're saying the same thing. With the rate increase that I'm proposing, it's going to, Ross Valley customers are going to increase less than Larkspur will. We're saying the same thing, but if we were just looking at this and we weren't changing your rate revenue structure or the amount of revenue you're collecting, then in reality, Larkspur would pay more, and as a result, Ross Valley would pay less, and it would end up that way. But because everyone's paying more rates, then you're right. Ross Valley's going to go up a little, and Larkspur's going to go up more.
And we haven't, when you showed us that rate structure, it was only one line. There really has to be two lines.
Correct. Yeah.
How are you going to do that? How much will you know to increase it?
It will be a one-time adjustment. So it's in year one.
I don't think we should do it that way.
I don't
think we should
either.
go to 5 years.
I mean, this has been going on for how many years?
It's kind of gone both ways, I've noticed. When I
Yeah,
look
that's
at
right.
History, at some point, Larkspur was paying much less, and then more, and it's been.
Well, and presumably, so if I understand this, because I've been hearing about this for years, Larkspur is the only city within our district that does not turn over this, some proportion of ad valorem to us. So the ratepayer in Larkspur feels like I pay some sewer rate and then I pay the county taxes. It's just that the city of Larkspur holds on to that whole amount, right? Right, okay. So they're going to feel like, I'm paying this amount in taxes and I'm paying this amount in sewer. So.
But it really is not that way, because what happened in 1978 was that San Anselmo and Fairfax and Ross, the towns had taxes. And this district had taxes. And the city of Larkspur had taxes, okay? And then when Larkspur annexed, every single city lost about 40% of their tax revenue. And Larkspur lost 40% of their tax revenue, and they said all of our tax revenues go into a general fund. And we'll pay sewer for service charges. So, Here's the deal. A home assessed at $1 million in Larkspur pays the same tax, you know, except for local differences. But from the county, they pay 1% of their tax goes into the county, and the county distributes it. And that's the same thing that happens in Ross and Kentfield and, you know, everything else. And the county distributes it, but the sanitary district had its own tax rate, and that's what we're getting.
So why can't Fairfax then do the same as Larkspur?
Because Fairfax never raised a sewer tax. They never had a sewer tax. Larkspur did. Larkspur was doing sewer.
Oh, they-
Fairfax never did sewer. Neither did Ross.
It's separated.
Yeah, it's our district tax is what we're getting.
So there is an argument that we should be charging every EDU in Larkspur this $146.
That's right.
So that, oh, but Andrew.
So long as we don't have a proportionality problem under 218.
With
right?
what?
A proportionality problem. We can't charge customers proportionally more than it costs to serve them.
That's
So
right.
one concern is if we're modifying rates based on revenue we're receiving as opposed to based on the cost of service. I just want to make sure that that.
Oh, right, but this would be the time to be sure, you know, this is what it costs to provide service to an EDU,
Right.
and then we just know where the money is coming from. It's slightly different in the case of Larkspur
Is
residents.
it costing more to provide them service?
No, but they're paying less. They're clearly paying less.
So we figure out how much
We're
it
getting less
costs
revenue from that.
per
Look,
EDU.
if
We're
it's
getting
simple,
less
if somebody is in
revenue.
Ross Valley but not Larkspur, and they're paying $1,200, and somebody's in Larkspur, and they're paying $900, they're paying $300 less. It doesn't cost any different, but they're paying less.
So
They have
the
to
argument works both ways. Yeah, that means that the Fairfax San Antonio residents are overpaying. So if you calculate, you know, total cost divided by EDUs and figure out how do we raise the money from the EDUs and make it the same. You know, I mean, I'm not real in favor of the full differential.
Yeah. That's why Greg said this is like a rabbit hole. It's like if you guys could try to change this based on.
I go along with it.
Okay,
There's, you know.
all right, well, pending legal review on proportionality, we'll consider that element.
But also, keep in mind that it's not a greatly bold maneuver to do what you're talking about doing.
Right.
If you look at the history that I presented
That's right.
early on, these big changes have been instituted by your predecessors at certain junctures.
Well, we
So-
already have a differential too.
So it's an
Just the
opportunity
amount.
for you to weigh in
Flatten it.
and create equity in the system. And with a good analysis, we can show the ratepayers that this is an equitable proposal so that everyone is being treated fairly and the same. So it's an opportunity to deal with this issue.
It's a really good point, and you make a great point that the analysis should show that we calculate the cost per EDU. Whether it's for Larkspur or Ross Valley, the cost per EDU doesn't change. They're the same type of customers.
That's all we needed.
So we're going to establish,
Your vision.
Thank you,
Right.
that's all we needed.
we're going to establish that they cost the same, and then we're going to say, well, we have this pot of money from property tax that we're going to give to these folks to keep their rates down and not to these folks because these other folks didn't pay that. And this is how much they get of credit because we did the math and we know how much they cost. Now, Doug, I am a little concerned about the idea that we phase it in because if the board takes a policy decision, you could phase it in. Because the reality is that property tax is, like I said earlier, it's something that you have discretion over how you use it. So you could decide to use it this way, or you could decide to use it this way, right? I mean, you could apply it to both customers because it's property tax, and there's nothing in the law that says you have to give it back to Ross Valley. But as a board, you can make the decision, well, these folks paid it, they should get the credit, they should get the benefit of it, right? So we're gonna keep it this way, and the problem with phasing this in is that you would be taking a policy saying, well, in year one, we're going to give them some of that money back, but not all of it. In year two, we're going to give them a little bit more, and by year five, we're going to be back to where things should have been the whole time. But now you have to explain why over the 5 years, why are you taking 5 years to get there and not just doing it in year one? So that would be my argument against phasing it in.
That amount, just to put it in context, is about 12%.
Would be a 12% increase. including the 4.9 or whatever it is?
Not sure about the 4.9, it's just on.
So it would be 16, it would be 12?
Yeah, it's not additive, but it would be more than 12 in year one.
So, okay.
That's why we're phasing it.
Right, but you've raised them 80% before, you know, I mean,
Well,
that's a different world. but,
Yeah.
you know,
that was a
It's an important, it's $420,000 a year every year. That's a hunk of money.
yeah. But also, a good analysis will then bake it in, so that the 4.9 is a different number. See, a good analysis would bake that increase, that one increase in, and then it would have a different recommendation for the schedule.
Yeah, the year one rates will be very different, and then after that, everyone will go up in lockstep together. So,
Well, that's not true either,
okay.
because the ad valorem changes to the value of the property.
True.
Yeah, but we
True.
have to set the rate.
And that's why you do a rate increase, or you do a rate study every 5 years or so to
It
dial
won't be
that
like that
back.
because the,
But doing those annual micro changes and stuff is difficult unless you have.
it'll be less
Right.
challenging.
Yes. Agreed. So should I assume that that's the board policy, that we want to go to closing that gap and to crediting the full amount to Ross Valley?
Do you?
With review of council.
I think this answers my question.
Yeah, she got the visual.
Because, yeah, the visual really helps.
What is the-
That you are calculating the EDU on a proportional basis.
Yes.
And then
Yes.
it's a separate matter considering the revenue.
Yeah, I mean, the only
That's
question
right.
would be if we smooth it out over time, is that a problem?
Yeah, well, because we're already.
Because we're already off.
I'm not sure if
Getting
it's a
more-
legal proportionality
getting more
issue, it's more of a
proportional every
policy.
year.
Yeah. I agree.
Okay.
Okay, and then the other thing that I wanted to bring up was a question that crossed my mind as I was reading your agreement with CMSA and thinking about how it might be enforced. So currently, you're charged by CMSA based on self-reported EDUs. And so you report 1 EDU for a single-family home, you report 0.9 EDUs for a multifamily unit, and then you calculate your non-residential EDUs based on an assumption that there's 215 gallons per day per EDU during the wintertime. And it got me to thinking, it was like, well, you know, there's 2 other agencies that pay the CMSA bill and they self-report their EDUs. What if they calculate their EDUs differently? Is there anything in their ordinance that says, you know, that they need to calculate it a certain way? So I read the CMSA ordinance and it says that it does need to be based on EDUs and strength, but it doesn't specify the exact methodology therein. And sure enough, the other districts do exactly that. They follow a very similar methodology to what you guys currently do. The difference that I noticed is that they report, or they calculate their non-residential EDUs based on 250 gallons per day during the winter. So that's going to result in them reporting fewer EDUs, even if they had exactly the same businesses. You know, for exactly the same profile, they would end up with a lower number. And I did the math, and it's not a big number. It's because the EDU portion is only for the debt service, because on the O&M side, it's based on actual flows and whatnot. So on the debt service, you're paying $50,000 more a year than you would be if you used the same 250 gallons and you reported fewer EDUs the way the other districts are. So, you know, in the scheme of things, on a $7 million bill, the $50,000 isn't huge. The other thing to think about is that you don't want to just immediately say, well, we want to close that gap, because you have to think about how that's going to affect your customers. So 250 gallons per day is how you used to charge your commercial customers. And you have to think about, if you go back to 250, what's going to happen is that you're going to be giving your businesses a break, because now they're going to be assigned a lower EDU expense. And now you're going to have shifts within your own system of who's picking up your bill when you charge your rates. And so what we would see if we went back to the 250, your businesses their bills wouldn't increase as much, and all your residential customers would go up a little bit more. So there's a lot of moving parts here. from my perspective, I didn't see anything that was fundamentally broken that had to be addressed, but I thought I would share those findings with you.
Finance committee did not want to change.
That's right.
The rates.
Well, they're.
Because we're gonna make 50 grand at CMSA, but we're gonna lose 160 grand on commercial
And
rates.
because 250 gallons a day is closer to reality than 250. So the other agencies should change. We'll talk to them about it. What would you
This
suggest?
is why we have all these agencies and we don't talk to each other.
And the math on the amount of water that's used is, I don't want to call it fuzzy, but it's not an exact science because, there's how much water is used on average by single-family homes during the winter, and then there's their peak demand during the winter, which is also a very important thing to consider because you guys are more worried about capacity and less worried about actual flows. As we talked about before, your costs aren't driven by flows. CMSA's costs aren't completely driven by flows, particularly their debt service, which is about infrastructure and about fixed costs. And so they're more worried about capacity. And so the way that you come up with the 215, if you read the 2014 study, you'll see that they did some analysis on water use and what the average was, and it was well below 215, and they came up with 215 based on some assumptions about peak demand and whatnot. But ultimately, it's you have some discretion here. You do want to apply some solid engineering concepts behind your logic, but ultimately that number has some discretion.
I defer to the finance committee on that point.
A killer is raising rates and changing the rate structure.
Yeah.
And somebody's ox is going to be gored. And the truth is, you don't know who will come out of the woodwork at you.
Well, we don't know, and so they'll come out because they got gored,
They don't.
and then we'll be like, "What do you mean you gored yet?"
Exactly.
Yeah.
We didn't even know it. And I think Mark points out that water consumption is a real squishy way to do wastewater analysis. So it could be 50% of the use goes in the garden. I think it's
It would be very difficult for us as an agency to budget if we do it by water usage, because we say, okay, well, this is our average usage, but then next year, half of our district says, we are not flushing all winter long, and then we don't get the money, but we've already spent it because it's in our budget. So we can't do that.
All right.
Anyways, I think we'll probably meet with the subcommittee one more time before coming back and giving you our final recommendations on rates.
Maybe board members can get to the general manager with, cases you want to have reviewed. Sure. Okay. I'd like to do the bookends. And then one Okay?
Thank
This
you.
is it?
All right.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
Very good job.
If you do a good job, I'll credit you. I don't want to put any pressure on you.
Now we have item 12.
So that was- Okay, so let's go to 12.
Good seeing you guys. Take care.
Oh, thanks, but you're also next
Authorizing
item.
I am? I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
you are.
We're much more likely to approve it.
Execute a consulting agreement with Hildebrand Consult, and we've been them for a cost allocation plan, a user fee study we want not to exceed. So this is an allocation of overhead rates, and it doesn't have anything to do with the service charges.
Okay.
It's like the fees for inspection, fees for,
Connection.
Connection.
Yeah, connection fees.
Connection, but not capacity.
Right, so you might recall in some of the earlier presentations today about our revenue, that one revenue pie, actually Mark presented that. And there was a smaller sliver for things like other fees, like connection fees. So, but it becomes important, and I'll just anecdotally, in the last month or two, larger institutions that come to us they see the fee that's per EDU and per drainage fixture unit, and it ends up being a major budgetary issue or whatever. It's a fee. It's a factor. And so we do need to explain, the basis of it and the reason for it. And I think the last time we updated our user fees was 5 years ago, 6 years ago. So similar to the sewer service charge we discussed, it's a good time for us to revisit our user fees and look at the ordinance that implements them and make it as clear as possible, and to eliminate ambiguities and language that leads to confusing outcome. There's some cleanup, as we like to say, that would be timely, along with revisiting how the whole calculation occurs. So with that, we just wanted to, we identified this opportunity to do this at this time.
At the same time, I think the board should use this opportunity to talk about what would be our parameters for discounting a project such as Victory Village. So no more should we have people come and say, I need 80% off, because our policy now is, this is the rate. It might be a parameter, depending on what the board decides, between 10 and 11, between 10 and 50, between 10 and 80, I don't know, but I think we should have a policy.
Great example, having a systematic approach that's predictable and
I
transparent.
still think you need to be able to make it flexible regardless. We could have one fee, but there would be some special situations. I just don't like to lock that in.
Well, that's what the board can discuss.
Yeah.
Well, I think it puts us in a bad position to be thinking about it on a case-by-case basis. I'd rather have a policy.
But let's put
I
on the
felt
agenda.
that coming with 80%. Anyway, so, but on this matter, any other board discussion? Any questions on this?
I think we've just seen whether he's competent or not.
Do a graph like that. Okay, any other?
I would move to authorize the general manager, upon review and approval of legal counsel, to execute a consultant services agreement with Hildebrand Consulting for a cost allocation plan and user fee study in the amount not to exceed $25,400.
Second, with the writing has to be bigger.
Anything else? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks, Mark.
Okay, you're done.
Very nice.
You're really good, Mark.
Great work. Appreciate it.
Okay.
This is, we've already discussed this, Doug spoiled it for us. We had this new greatest. Who's cheap?
Is this it? Yeah.
Do we know them?
Well, we
Talk about that. Okay, good.
Consideration of adopting a resolution authorizing a mitigated negative declaration for and awarding and authorizing the general manager upon review for the council to execute a construction contract for large diameter gravity sewer project 2-3B. Lower Shady Lane, Poplar Avenue, in Kratos, Inc. Not to exceed $4,959,215.
Good. It's getting late in the evening, so
Yeah.
I'll be very brief. We did split this project. It was originally 2-3, and it was split into two. And we recently received bids in January, 5 bids on a project with a $5,215,000 engineer's estimate. One of the 5 bids came in under that engineer's estimate, and through the normal process of reviewing qualifications and determining it was the lowest responsive bid, Kratos was awarded, or is recommended to be awarded this contract for $4,959,000. During the Finance Committee, we revisited the question of what was the original bid on that combined project, and when it was split up, what were the costs, the bids received and that sort of thing. So Catherine Hayden went back and verified these numbers and created a handout. So you can see that by splitting up the project into two, the bids came in about $3.4 million less than had they been combined. and I'll encourage further discussion, but at the Finance Committee, we illuminated there was only one bid received for the original combined project.
Yeah.
In the heart of Ross, very difficult place to build things, let alone the complexity of the many disciplines in the combined project, probably created some concern about risk to the contractor community. And therefore, we only got one bid, and it was higher than the engineer's estimate by a great deal, almost double. So it was, in retrospect, hindsight 2020, it was a great decision to go back and split the project in terms of that saving. But one cautionary note is that, yes, one bid did come in below engineer's estimate. Wonderful thing to happen in the year 2019 compared to other districts and projects. 4 out of 5 were above the engineer's estimate. So, and then, you can speak to Kratus's qualifications. There were individuals at Kratus that used to work at Ranger Pipeline. So there was experience there.
I was gonna say.
There's a reason why they were responsible, even though it's a new name. So, and Catherine, feel free to illuminate further, but with that's my introduction.
Well, I was kind of pleased to see that the next bid wasn't that far off. So it kind of supports, I didn't want somebody to be so lowball that it's scary.
The other thing that happened around the time we bid this out the first time was the Santa Rosa fire. So, right, wasn't that one of the reasons given that a whole lot of contract, or was that not a? Yeah. And at the time, I thought it was that was part of the thing.
Well, that was a good deal. Any more questions on this?
So wait, is it people who defected from Ranger who started this
Yeah,
company?
they started their own company.
Okay.
Did
they carry the liability?
It's been a long time. They're not brand new. They've 2013, maybe even 2011. So it's been a while.
Do we get references on their projects?
It's not part of the normal process, but they give us the project experience. So we'll do that.
Okay, any further comment from the board?
I think the board acted responsibly, as did the administration here.
We should send this to
Staff,
Craig.
and it's just really great to save money. And, that this is an important savings.
Are you not entertaining?
I recommend that we adopt resolution number 19-1554, adopting a mitigated negative declaration for and award and authorize the general manager, upon review and approval of council, to execute the construction contract for the large diameter gravity sewer project 2-3B, Lower Shady Lane, Poplar Avenue, with the lowest responsive and responsible bidder, Kratos Inc., in an amount not to exceed $4,959,215.
A second?
Second?
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Okay, 15A. Performance measurements. See how we're high on the full
When it's, yep, I noticed that.
wet weather?
Yep, we're not doing,
In
I
dry
know.
weather, we're at 42 to 44%. We're up to 50, which means we have a starting line.
Yep, that's what it means.
Yeah.
What a month.
And that's depressing, because we're doing a lot of repairs, and I was hoping that was going the other direction. It's clearly not. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I didn't expand my GM report this month, or verbal report, but in the GM bulletin, I gave a pretty extensive analysis of a certain case study in San Anselmo, where similar, if not worse conditions this year, 2 times in February we're experiencing, we had no overflows.
Oh, yeah.
But we had an overflow in 2017, and the capital project was completed this past year. So I think there's a connection between our capital improvement work and overflows being avoided. So that's, I will just say that's the number one thing in retrospect 5 years, and in the near term future, prevent overflows. And we've done it, through a concerted effort. The forthcoming focus is really now shifting to preventive work up in the upper reaches of the system for I&I control that hopefully will create a measurable impact on the flows that go to CMSA over time.
I really like the information on service calls.
The 36 repairs, spot repairs, good for a month, that's really great.
Excellent. Thank you, I'll read that. Okay, monthly capital program. We reviewed this. Lots of green. Colored that's great. Thank you, Captain. Okay, and then 15C is election for AFCO, special district meeting. And the president is authorized to vote on this. But I did it to Steve and I did it together. And we decided, we haven't sent the vote in, have we?
I think so.
We haven't sent it in.
That's okay.
I oppose all of them.
Lou Kios sent me an email today.
Yeah. Well,
A little too late.
Yeah.
You know?
I emailed him once or twice.
what we're recommending here is the incumbent. And someone we know, someone I've worked with.
And
And
Lou is-
he approached us first, before Lou. Nothing against Lou.
First ask.
I'm sure Lou is great. But this election, actually, there were 3 candidates and there's 3 vacancies.
Oh.
One is a regular seat and then 2 are alternate seats. So they're all going to have the opportunity to serve.
Oh, good, okay.
But they'll be alternates, that's not quite. That's fine, that's fine, I support this.
All right.
I think we're done.
I have one quick thing I'd like to make on this. You gave us this, which is outstanding.
Yeah.
But if you add the 2 projects together, because one says it came in 129% and one came in at 95%. Okay, but if you add them together, they came in at 106% of costs versus the 222% on the total project before. So that is really outstanding. 106% versus 222. I added
Right, in this big climate, right?
What if I told you that the engineer's estimate on the first project was ridiculous?
Okay. Would you tell that to the engineer?
Yeah,
Oh, this one.
somebody else.
Oh, this one.
It was too low for the climate. It was too high. Yeah, we had a big shift in the climate.
Okay, meeting adjourned.